We're good.
Okay, thanks, Alex. So welcome to our Housing Commission meeting. We are one person short of quorum, so we will not be taking any actions until we receive, or until we have one more person arrive, but we are going to start on the agenda. So we're going to skip approval of the notes because that requires a vote. And before we get to the Americana Hotel, there are two items that I wanted to bring up with the commission. One was, oh great, we have quorum. One was the email that I sent out about having two meetings in May. One, a joint meeting with the Tenant Landlord Commission to have the update from CPHD on their steps to implement the CAF long-term strategies document, as well as recommendations from the Serrano report and our joint subcommittee. So I did not hear back from everyone, but it seemed like a number of people were okay with it. Some people couldn't make it. It will not be at the Serrano. It's going to be just here because they didn't have the audio visual capabilities to do the hybrid meeting. But I just wanted to get a sense from the people, at least who are present, that are people okay with doing that second meeting on the date of the Tenant Landlord Commission meeting?
Sorry.
That is the
It's the 10th.
yeah, May 9th.
Yes. Oh, I have that scheduled.
So that would be, I mean, we could do either our meeting on the 4th virtually or that one virtually, although I do feel that doing a joint meeting with TLC probably is better to have that in person. But if people feel like that's a lot and they're, back to back 1 week to the next, we could do our meeting on the 4th virtually, but that would be our last virtual meeting for the.
How long is the one that's going to go? Do you have any idea? This next morning we have a housing commission meeting, the homeownership committee.
I don't think that's the only agenda item. Right?
Yeah, it would be the only item.
Okay.
So I'm sure there'll be discussion, but it's just that. So hopefully it won't be more than 2 hours.
I had 2 points, maybe a question. I thought we added a meeting, so we got 3.
So, yes, so because we added the missing middle meeting earlier this year, we are now allowed 3 virtual meetings. So we used one of our 3.
Okay, I thought that was just for personal, like people could take that, but not for the overall.
So for personal, each person gets 2 misses per year, and I don't think that increases based on the number that you add. But I can also double check.
I thought it was the opposite, but
yeah,
we will clarify.
I just have one more point. I think I'll move in whatever the majority of this group feels, but I feel like we as a commission, we spent a lot of time deservedly on Serrano, but I think we might be able to move a little bit quicker if it went back to a subcommittee so that the commission could move forward with the commission business. I know the issues are urgent. I do care deeply about them, but when I think about how many hours we spent as an entire commission on one property, it's been a lot of our time. So
this meeting is not about the Serrano. This is about the updates to the all the CAF strategies and oversight things. So it's and I think staff has really stressed that as well. That when we asked them to have it at the Serrano, they were like, "Why do you want to have it at the Serrano? This isn't about the Serrano." So it's a result of the Serrano, but this meeting is more broadly about what the county is doing and as a follow-up to our recommendations as well as the document that they put together. I do think this is important for us to cover as a whole commission, and we have been talking to the Tenant Landlord Commission about doing it since January. So I don't want to back out of having that discussion with the full commission, but certainly if people can't attend that night, that's okay. And it will be recorded, so people can always watch later or something. But I do think it's important to have that meeting. Any other? Yep.
Were you speaking just in general, meetings, not just that particular meeting? Were you speaking just
yeah, just kind of broadly.
Right. So excluding that meeting, have something different for the Serrano. Something should come up.
Yeah, I mean, if the majority of the commission feels that way, I think we could dive deeper in a commission. I always feel like the issues are so intense, we don't have enough time to really deliberate them. It's just public comment. We're going to send a letter. But I feel like in a subcommittee, we could do a little bit more work and maybe accomplish a little more.
Yeah, and during our May meeting, I want to talk about subcommittees, because right now, the only one we have is the homeownership one. And I know specifically, I think it was Parks Arlington, staff had asked, can this go to the bricks and mortar subcommittee? And I was like, we don't technically have one yet. We don't have chairs for that. And so that's something that I want to bring to the commission for our meeting on the 4th of May, as well as I have recommended revisions to the charter and a equity housing commission equity framework for us to consider, and hopefully for how we should incorporate equity into the decisions that we make, and how we, like what we ask for from staff and things like that. So those are some of the items that I originally had hoped to discuss tonight, but we have too much on our agenda, so it got pushed to May. And yeah, that's what I'm hoping. Hopefully there's not, at this point, Plan Langston Boulevard is not.
That will not be on May. There will be another site plan, Crystal Towers 3 for May,
Okay.
likely.
Sounds good. But yeah, we can do the May 4th meeting virtually if people would. I'm happy to do that.
And then the 10th one in person.
Would be in person, yeah.
And no longer than 2 hours, right?
Okay. You said you couldn't do the 10th?
Yeah.
Okay, that's okay. Like I said, it'll be recorded,
Okay.
and, and if people aren't able to make it and they have questions or things that they want to share with other commissioners, they can always do that as well. So again, it's just one topic, and I'll see if staff is able to send anything in advance so that people who can't make it can, submit questions or something to make sure that staff covers that. Yeah, we should be good.
So the May 4th is the one.
Yeah, so May 4th is a regular meeting, and that one we will plan to do virtually.
It does sound like the sound is not projecting well, so you could try to project. It's not these speakers. I know it's
It's not these
confusing.
guys,
It's
I think?
these ones
Oh,
up here
okay.
on the ceiling.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ann. And the other item was around the SPRC process. So I had attended an SPRC meeting for the Wakefield Manor property and the redevelopment of that parking lot, and I was really dismayed that there was no tenant representation at the meeting. I used to be a tenant there for about 10 years, so I had a lot of comments and feedback. But when I'd asked staff, why is no one from the property who's a resident there, but we have representatives from the condos across the street, the answer was, well, it's hard to get tenants involved, and they don't have a representative structure, so we just didn't include them. And so I sent an email to the head of the planning division and the chair of the planning commission to say, like, hey, we've talked about this previously in the housing commission, that we need to have tenant representatives, especially when the property is a redevelopment of an existing apartment building, especially like a CAF. I know we talked about this with Marabella, that it was really disappointing that none of the residents at the Marabella were at the table. So on Wednesday this week, I had a really productive discussion with the planning commission chair and the head of their SPRC subcommittee about some steps that the planning commission and staff can potentially take to not just try and get tenants to be present, but also to do more outreach and make sure that there's better consultation. And so they're running that down. But one of the things that we talked about was that is going to potentially require more resources from the planning division. And they brought up that the county manager's budget was recommending cutting one of the planners from the planning division. And so they asked us, would you be willing to go back to the county board and sort of amend your budget letter and say, we don't want you to cut any planners from the planning division. Here's additional needs that are really important, especially if we're looking at equity and making sure that our tenants have a voice in the processes that directly impact their lives. And to please recommend that they do not cut that position. So thoughts on sending an addendum to the county board and our budget letter requesting that they don't cut the planner position.
I make a motion or suggestion, whatever it is, to go ahead and include that verbiage in the letter.
Okay.
I second that.
Addendum.
Yeah, I second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And online, I think we have just Laura.
Aye.
This is Laura. Aye.
And this is Paul. Aye. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Thanks.
So thank you. Okay, I will send them an addendum to our budget letter requesting that they not cut the planner position and providing some context about the SPRC and more representation from tenants and more engagement from staff. Okay, those are the two items that I wanted to discuss with you all that were not on the agenda. We can go back to approval of the notes. Any edits on the notes? Okay, do I have a motion to approve the notes?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay. Second. And again, just all those in favor of approving the notes say aye.
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 Okay. That
And,
passes.
yeah, and I abstain. 'cause I
I
wasn't
abstain,
here.
okay. 2-1. Well, then actually, I think we need to do roll call. Right? If I'm doing voice vote, can we have abstentions?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Then I defer to you, Alex, on that. Okay.
Thanks, Alex.
Okay, sounds good. And then our next item, since we have no public comment, is the Americana Hotel.
So, good evening, everyone here and online. My name is Alex McMillan. I'm with the Housing Division on the development team, and I will be kicking this off before passing it over to the Americana Hotel team. So, Americana Hotel site plan. It's at 1400 Richmond Highway in Crystal City. And JVG Smith proposes the demolition of the current Americana Hotel building and the development of a 19-story residential building with ground floor retail. There's proposed to be 639 units, and it is located within the Crystal City Coordinated Redevelopment District. So looking at the Crystal City sector plan for a second here, site plans rezoning to CO Crystal City can earn up to a 10.0 FAR, floor area ratio. The sector plan does include a policy goal that 20% of the gross floor area above the standard site plan base density be provided as up to 60% AMI units on site. However, applicants may submit an alternative affordable housing plan for consideration by the county board. And one last note there, the plan also recommends prioritizing the use of cash contributions for county funded affordable projects in the plan area, which I will get back to in a second. So taking a quick look at the Crystal City contributions that have been rezoned to CO Crystal City, going back to 2013. You see there are a handful of sites. The first couple, the county did achieve that goal of 20% on site. However, the last few, which this commission has heard in the last few years, which are 1900 Crystal Drive, and Crystal Plaza 1 and Crystal Plaza 5, they all did offsite units at River House, which is nearby. And then one caveat there, Crystal Plaza 5, in addition to the 35 off-site units at River House, they also contributed a cash contribution of $4.75 million to the AHIF. So looking at the affordable housing program at the site, the base is about $2.1 million, or 15 on-site units, or 22 off-site nearby units, or 29 off-site units. For the earned density on the site, there's a 7.5, a little bit over $7.5 million AHIF contribution. So there are a few policy considerations that staff made when making this decision to do cash instead of on-site units. The first of these is leveraging. Cash contributions often leverage more affordable units off-site and for longer affordability periods than on-site CAFs. This is especially the case for projects located in areas where the rent differential between market and affordable rents are especially high. So for example, at the anticipated Crystal Houses infill development project, the county could provide the gap financing for about 93 units from that $7.5 million right there. In comparison, the county would only receive probably between 25 to 30 units on site at the new Americana Hotel site through that site plan process. And then another big point there, the units, for example, at Crystal Houses would be affordable up to 99 years instead of that standard 30-year term that is received through site plans. So by doing this, it really is about 3 times as many units being leveraged for about 3 times as long. The second consideration is the budget outlook. So the county currently has significant recent and anticipated financial commitments, including Crystal Houses and also the Barcroft Apartments. The county is expecting an AHIF request of about $53 million for Crystal Houses, and then also opened a $150 million line of credit to help acquire and keep the Barcroft Apartments affordable for 99 years. So receiving a cash contribution in place of the on-site units for this site plan will greatly benefit these ongoing commitments, especially at Crystal House, which is in the same area, a few blocks away. The last policy consideration here is the goals of the Crystal City Sector Plan. The AHIF contribution would further the goal of maximizing the stock of CAFs in Crystal City by providing the subsidy to the nearby Crystal Houses project. And then the Crystal City Sector Plan also has a recommendation of prioritizing the use of cash contributions earned in CO Crystal City to be used for county-funded affordable projects in the plan area. So that is my quick presentation, and I can hand it over to the applicants.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Malcolm Williams. I am the development manager for JBT Smith on this project. Excited to be here. Summer day, even though it's April. And I will be presenting our very brief presentation just to give folks some background information on where we are, what we're working on, and probably reiterate a lot of information that Alex should share. Share my screen. So this is a rendering from the East Street side of our building. And so for folks who don't know where we are located kind of mid-block in 15th Street and 14th Street. We're adjacent, basically next door to MSI HQ2. And then to our right, you'll see Route 1, which theoretically is coming to grade as a large-scale VDOT project. Next, I'll just touch on some brief highlights. So our zoning summary, we've got about 527,000 square feet of gross square footage. We have about 3,800 square feet of retail square footage. That's going to be on this east side as part of achieving sector plan goals of activating that street. We're looking at 639 units as of today, about 200 feet in height across those 19 stories. And we have 188 parking spaces on site that is comprised of 2 levels of below grade parking. And then off site, we took advantage of the zoning ordinance there and have, we're going to use another property adjacent to ours, the Bartlett, that has excess parking. And so we're contributing about 206 spaces to those additional spaces down the street. Here's a brief unit mix. We can circle back to that if you have more questions, but we have studios, junior 1 beds, 1 bedrooms plus dens, 2 beds, and 3 beds dispersed throughout the property. Here's just a quick ground floor plan. So I'll just briefly go through some of the items color-coded in the legend. Like I said before, the retail portion of the site is here where my cursor is. The green area will be our lobby in front of house space. Adjacent to that is this red area where we have leasing and office space for the concierge team and the property management team. We'll have the mailroom here, which was strategically located next to this exit here, so that the package and delivery next to the loading zone can be pretty direct, and folks who are making those deliveries don't have to run around the building and have a difficult time getting to where they need to go. Additionally, as I just mentioned, we have our parking loading dock. So when you come off each street, you make this turn here towards the south of the building, and this is your garage entry. And then we've got the mechanical shown in this darker gray. Again, here's our southeast street rendering, just highlighting some of the things I just mentioned. Again, here's our retail bay, our residential entry here. This is our co-working and amenity space to date, and then our loading zone here shown on the backside of the building. This is a better rendering of that entry condition. We were thoughtful about setting back this entry space to create more of an alcove and a queue area for folks who are waiting for their Uber, ride pickups, or their friends to come get them from their residence. Also worth mentioning is this on the north side of the building, we have an east-west connection that will eventually connect to Route 1 when it comes to grade. At its current condition, that will just run into the existing retaining wall and kind of create like a walkway for residents and folks in the neighborhood who just want to take a walk down towards that side of the building. Next, you'll see another rendering of our entry. This is a zoomed in. We have this really cool feature, which we're really proud of. It's called the tabletop, which is this large structure you see here. That frames the building. We have neighbors to the north and south, and we had an opportunity to create an expression in a moment at the central facade, and we really felt that this form and shape would do that, and we're really impressed with how it came out. So happy to see that it's looking like it's going to make it to the finish line. On the right side, we have our residential entry from the alternate view. So this would be the entrance being at your back. You're looking out towards East Street, and then the streets here are where HQ2 is Met Park, which is just a short walk across the street for those who are in our building. Also worth mentioning on the slide, through the 4-point process and working with staff, we increased the amount of biophilic elements shown in this space. So that includes this wood material soffit, some of the plantings and the wood elements shown at the benches, and then additionally some of the trees and this additional wood bench shown here on the front side of the building. I won't spend much time on this. I think Alex did a great job. We're contributing $7.5 million to as our bonus density contribution. That funding is intended to fund approximately 19 units at the Crystal House redevelopment. One quick note is the Crystal House redevelopment is also a JBG initiative, it's the Washington Housing Initiative. So we feel very proud that we can not only create that housing to preserve affordability, but increase that housing and make it more viable with this contribution from our project. And so Crystal House is located in the Coordinated Redevelopment District, and staff and JBG believe this contribution will have a larger impact in achieving the affordable housing goals of the sector plan than what could be provided on site, which Alex previously touched on. In addition to that contribution, we're making a base density contribution of $2.11 million towards that requirement. And this map here just shows your distance from where our site is all the way to Crystal House, which is a pretty rare opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have questions or feedback from commissioners?
The parking, how did you get that deal with the Bartlett? 300 extra parking? Because I go to that Whole Foods, so
Sure.
I'm just trying to get a mental picture, like, where's that parking at?
So that park is going to be below that retail level. We also own the Bartlett, so that's how
okay.
That's how they were able to get it.
I'm like, man, that's nice, y'all.
No, this isn't benevolence from another developer. We looked across the aisle and said, you got.
I guess my question is for But what's the percentage of Crystal houses affordable now? Like, is it all?
So, there are Crystal House 1 and 2 already on the site.
Yeah.
Those are, I'm not exactly sure, but mostly affordable, if not all affordable. But what I was referring to mostly in my presentation was the infill development opportunities. So, the county is in an agreement with APA and EYA to develop those sites, Crystal House 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. That will be adding 655 affordable units, as well as about 189 market rental units. And then there will also be home ownership, market home ownership opportunities at that site. So it's a multi
Okay, I think we saw that one. Right?
phase
Oh,
project.
shoot. I think we saw the one, right? I did not.
Yeah,
I did that. Okay.
yeah, they came a few months ago to talk.
Just to clarify, the Crystal Houses redevelopment is new.
So yes, that's another point that was not touched upon in the presentations. Both this and that project are both going to be new construction.
Okay, good to know. 'Cause
The old, yeah, like the affordable housing or the affordable homes get pushed into not the new development. And I mean, I feel like I'm a record. It's the same. We see another beautiful building, and it just let's push them over to another side. That's for me. Yeah. So
The junior, that's what they call junior one bedrooms? What makes them junior?
It's just where the bedroom is located. And so a true one bedroom means that your window is in your bedroom. And that's just a code for most jurisdictions across the country. A junior one bed means that your bedroom's set a little bit further back. And so it's kind of in the mid portion of your unit, but you still have light access. So you usually have a panelized piece of glass, for lack of a better term, and then you can kind of open the door, look out and see the sun, but the window wall will actually be likely your living space or where your kitchen is.
Some separation.
Okay, it sounds like.
Helen.
Yeah, it's a studio with the exception that you have walls to surround your bedroom.
And you have 33 bedrooms.
I'm waiting to, if somebody could let me back in, I can pull
Oh.
it in.
Yeah,
I
33.
accidentally left the meeting.
But like the majority was like
what?
270 for one bedrooms or junior ones. I know, I remember, I saw that, 44%.
It's
Well, the
all-
most was like one bedroom, it was like 44%.
Are you able to get
So
in?
for the junior one beds, we have 42%.
Now, but how much does that run as far as, like, a junior versus a regular one? Like, what's the difference? I'm trying to see what kind of, like, market you're targeting and
Expensive.
realistic.
Yeah, it's HQ2, maybe it's all 10,000 per starter, is that something already?
I was like 2,500.
It's not 10,000. We're still evaluating the numbers. I don't have the finance.
Trying to move in? No, I'm just trying to just get, just numbers, nothing like concrete, like, okay, this is what they're gonna be. I know it'll fluctuate by that building, because what is it? Is it a main?
We have a question.
Thanks. Yes, thank you. So the thinking about the on-site versus off-site question, doesn't this result? I mean, I definitely understand the benefit of having cash to fund the gap financing necessary to produce the Crystal Houses affordable housing that's been committed. But doesn't this result in ultimately fewer affordable units? I mean, those are an unfunded mandate in Crystal Houses, but at least they're dedicated affordable income and intended to be. So I just wonder how staff would respond to that we're getting money, but we're not getting any more current housing opportunities for people.
Yeah, so we are, getting the cash now, and based on a couple of things that I talked to, really in conjunction with each other, the budget outlook, as well as that leveraging piece, we will not be getting any on-site units at this new Americana site. But what we will be doing is ensuring that we can meet the commitments that have already been made. I would say that, historically, it has been our practice to get on-site units. But just given the larger commitments and tight budgets, we may be, in this case, exploring cash in lieu of those on-site units. And I think it makes more sense even so in this case, because those off-site units are nearby, they're in the same neighborhood. And then, of course, being able to yield about three times as many units for 3 times as long with that contribution for the earned bonus density.
So Alex, the county manager in his budget, which we talked about last month, he cut AHIP in half in his proposal. So from 18.7 million last year to I think 9.4. And this could be looked at as just, well, instead of the county having to pony up and pay for it by taking money from somewhere else in the general fund, they're using this project to pay for it, and that way they don't have to fund as much to AHIP, which I agree with Paul. We're, instead of getting more units than we otherwise would have got, we're just using this money to pay for a commitment the county's already made and has to come up with the money somehow. So is it, yeah, I think it is kind of shortchanging us a bit, which is why I hope that the county board takes our letter to heart and actually provides more funding for AHIP at levels that it should be at. I mean, 9.4 million is way too low, and at that levels we can never meet our affordable housing goals as a community. It's ultimately though going to be up to staff, right? How AHIP is allocated, whether it's for other units. Once the money goes to AHIP, staff makes that decision, right? Of this is where the money is going to be spent.
Yeah, so I think the first usage of AHIP is to meet the requirements that have already been made. For example, there's debt service that has already been committed to that needs to be paid, and then there are also projects in the pipeline, such as the ones mentioned, that have also had commitments towards them. And then, really it's kind of what's left and how else we can use that money to continue to preserve and create more units. But yes, as you mentioned, there are budgetary pressures.
I think the debt service for Barcroft and Buckingham was about $9 million a year. So that's basically all that the county manager was reckoning, so that total for AHIP is already spoken for debt service. And then Crystal House, this would help, the 7 million total would help go towards, or I guess, 9 million, 9.6 in total.
Yeah, between the 2 and the 7, right?
7.5,
Yeah. And then the county has to figure out where the other, 40 million is coming
For
from.
Crystal Houses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How much is left in AHIP?
That is not a number I know off the top of my head. It changes frequently, and I don't believe we have our asset manager on this evening. Yeah, that's not a number I have right now. I will say, though, that 53 million for Crystal Houses will be split up into different phases, and so that money will be committed at different times over the next 3 to 4 years. I would also say that the contribution from this project will also take a few years to come in. It doesn't hit the AHIP account right away. It's at the certificate of occupancy is when that payment is made. So, it won't alleviate immediate budget pressures, but it will help
I mean, I don't think I have an issue in principle with doing the cash contribution over the onsite, because onsite you are getting less units than you would for the cash contribution, depending on how that money is spent. But I do have an issue if the county board and the manager don't ultimately invest in levels that they should for AHIP, and they're just relying on developer contributions to make up for the commitments that we've already made as a county. So hopefully that's not the case. You know, we wrote our letter. I talked to Matt DeFronti about it. But you know, at this point, it's ultimately up to the board. But Paul, did you have anything else you wanted to say on that topic?
I have a couple of questions. Where's the closest metro station to this property?
There's two, so you have Crystal City and Pentagon City. They're each about 3 blocks away.
Gotcha. Did that help influence the amount of parking that was needed on site, or?
Yes.
Okay.
So we did a pretty comprehensive traffic study with our traffic consultant, Rose Slade. And between the shared parking at the Bartlett, the proximity to the public transportation, including bus and cycles and all that fun stuff, we took a hard look at it and said, you know, we only need 0.3 on site, which has been consistent across most of our properties.
Gotcha. I read an RLNow article that talked a little bit about like some sloping issues. Maybe it was like along Route 1. Were you all able to resolve that, or did I just misunderstand the?
Could you be more specific?
Yeah, I guess there were like some, when you knocked down the Americana, there was like some slope or grade issues.
No grade issue. I mean,
Okay.
so for reference, the site changes elevation from Eads Street down towards Route 1.
Sure.
But I mean, we have a lot of time and energy spent on
Gotcha.
understanding
Okay.
what that means for the building and how it unfortunately to the site. So.
Gotcha. And my last question was, when was the last JBG project where we actually had committed affordable units on site? I don't remember. Maybe staff could help remind us or refresh us.
I definitely don't off the top of my head. We can get you that answer.
I thought it was one of those earlier.
Well, besides Crystal Houses, I know that that's a different project, but are there other examples where JGB Smith has put on site for, has it always been contribution?
I know for the more, Kendrick with more with that, I know for some of the recent ones that Mr. McMillan put up there, there was the River House properties that were there. I believe the Bartlett may have been, but I'm not certain. That's Pentagon City technically. So no, I think they may, all the ones recently have been in the routes.
Okay. Would it be right if, maybe this is like an offline discussion, but as part of the staff presentation, it might be helpful for this commission to see, you know, like, hey, this developer almost always puts on site, or, you know, this developer historically doesn't put on site, just maybe as a point of information.
Maybe just a history of the developer's past
Yeah.
developments. Okay. Yes, that could be useful.
Thanks.
I did want to add to, I don't know, I think, Mike, you referenced the RLNow article that talks about the planning commission discussion. They wrestled with the idea of on-site units versus cash contributions or off-site, and some members of the planning commission felt like there should be more a focus on-site units. Other people said, well, there's pros and cons of doing that. Cash contributions, you tend to get more, especially if you're using that money to preserve older units that are cheaper, versus building new units that are more expensive, so the money just doesn't go as far. But the ordinance in general, I think one of the points too that was raised is that the cash contribution, I think a lot of people think it's just not nearly enough, and it's been in place for what, like 20 years now?
The ordinance?
Yeah.
Almost
About
20
formula.
years.
Yeah.
A little bit less.
So yeah, I think there was some concern too that needs to be updated.
Yeah.
Obviously, that takes an act of the legislature, but that as things have gotten more valuable, real estate in Arlington, there's at least a number of advocates who feel like developers are not having to provide as much for affordable housing as they probably should for what they're getting in return. I did have sort of an unrelated point, and I know it's too late for this, but it was a really iconic Americana hotel sign, and there's few things that are iconic in Arlington. And HQ2 was gonna be one of them, and who knows if that's even gonna be built now, the Helix
yeah.
property, which I was excited about. I know other people, but it's different. Everything in Arlington looks the same. Everything that's new. Was there ever any thought of like, oh, we can incorporate this sort of neon sign and sort of make this like unique and, you know, and that's no disrespect to the plan that you guys put forward. I think it looks very nice and would be a great place to live. But just as far as, you know, I don't know what the name of it's going to be, but doing a neon sign, which there's probably the board and staff would have potentially also had issues with and say, oh, we don't like big signs that are, you know, bright and everything, because Arlington also has issues with that. But was that something that, you know, was considered or?
Yes, so internally and externally, I've been on this project since inception. That's been our charge, is to figure out what to do with the signs. And so we took a long look at it internally, and then we found some external challenges. So the first answer to your question is we cannot incorporate the signs at this juncture. We took a long, hard look at the signs themselves, our design parameters, and then what just kind of makes sense given our site constraints. Being a long, narrow site, we've only got frontage really, at least today, on each street. So to slap that huge Americana sign on each street would kind of disrupt activation goals. The dimensions of the sign we recently got, and if you want, but that's our first stop. The second stop was.
I was just gonna say, for what it's worth, the county sign ordinance wouldn't allow that to go up anyway. It's a non-conforming sign, so you wouldn't, that would be illegal.
Is it going to a museum then?
So we're working on getting it donated to the right organizations.
Can it be art in the lobby? Or
no.
It's
too big?
It's like the sign doesn't look that big from the
Right, on the
highway,
highway.
but when you scale it and put it in a human scale, I mean, it's almost the size of this wall. And so, you know, and we can't also use the name Americana for the naming rights for the building. So we went down that avenue as well, because that seemed like legally there's a bunch of stuff that we're looking at the stars and maybe I think we said the A and the.
We are looking, like, there's two signs, there's the those, but also like the D.
Yeah.
So we are looking at opportunities. Cars in the interior, like, minor about that, maybe preserving it. The scale is just much more, and we do, like we said, a lot. I didn't want to interrupt you guys.
This is my colleague.
But I've spent a lot of time focused.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of assumed that it wouldn't, because Arlington is just crazy about signs, and I think our sandwich board's legal again in Arlington. I think that was a lawsuit for a while, but like anything that's different or special, Arlington doesn't allow. It would have been really cool if there was a way to incorporate.
Yeah, I mean, we our like initial design concept, we looked at trying to do it on the Richmond Highway facade, and it just doesn't fit. And then there's also the existing conditions of those signs. They're not well maintained, and they've been, you know, out of repair and there for probably a decade or more. So we recently went up to the building and just kind of looked at them. We tried our best, I guess is what I'm trying.
Okay. Doris, you have a question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to find out how many fully accessible Type A units you're going to have in the building that you're building, 639 units in total. So it's a very significant add of multifamily units. So I'm just wondering, and I'm also curious about what the price ranges are going to be for units in that building.
So to answer your first question, we have 13 Type A units across all unit types, and that represents about 2% of our total unit mix. And to answer your second question, we're still evaluating what those rental rates are, given we're in 2023 and we'll deliver that building hopefully in 2027. So don't have a
but it's going to be at or more than the market rate now, right?
Hopefully I can't say for sure if it's more.
Yeah, okay. So the comment that I want to make is that I think it's really sad that there'll only be 13 units that are available and accessible to people with disabilities, no matter their income level, let alone the fact that if I understand the proposal correctly, we'll be adding to the AHEF, but they'll be in this wonderfully prominent project, building in Crystal City near the subway and the whole thing. There won't be but only a few units for that are accessible to people with disabilities, and I just think that's sad, and I'm saddened by the fact that I'm seeing another JBG project going through and affordable units are being assigned elsewhere. So that's the comment that I wanted to make, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Doris.
Just to add to that, we had an accessibility comment come up through SPRC2. We did meet with their recommended consultant, and she did review our plans and didn't have any major comments. She actually gave us some feedback and provided some guidance on how to make it a little bit more accessible, which we're working on incorporating to our design. So we're looking at it holistically, not just at the unit level.
We have a rep on SPRC for I do not believe that. And also, just question or recommendation for staff: is it possible for the briefs that staff provide to us about projects to always include the disability information, like accessibility information in there? So I know doing a full equity analysis isn't going to happen yet. That's my long-term goal. But I think at least the accessibility information, so that we always have that and are able to review that. I think that would be very, very helpful and important information for us to be able to review in advance as part of this.
Yep, we can add that.
Thank you. Other thoughts or questions about the site? Okay. And so the way that this is worded in here, it says that they have multiple options, but just so I understand, the base, they are doing the base contribution of $2 million. That it's not still up in the air. What that is.
I don't know that we decided yet, but typically that's
okay.
That's our intention. So.
At what point before? Because it's 9 days before the board meeting, right? Is that decided before or after?
It's not, so the way the conditions are written,
yeah.
it's an either or. So you don't actually have to decide until almost certificate of occupancy. So it can go pretty far down path when you pick it. It's not picked when we.
Okay. Because I didn't realize that it was that late in the process. It makes it harder to evaluate impact, but it's good to know. Okay, do we have a motion on this agenda item? Okay, do we have a second? Okay, let's do a roll call vote for this. Do you have a copy of the rules?
Oh, on the hybrid, just for the meeting minutes.
Oh, right. Okay, well, I'm first on here, so I vote yes. Commissioner Montgomery.
Yes.
Commissioner Norris is on the line.
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Surface.
Yes.
Commissioner Blake,
Yes.
Commissioner Berkey is sick, Commissioner Gilray,
Yes.
Commissioner Heminger,
Yes.
and Commissioner Lee is not with us, right? Commissioner Edwards,
Yes.
Commissioner Rubalcaba,
Yes.
Commissioner Brown.
I'm going to vote no because of the lack of on-site units.
Thank you, and that passes. Paul, if you have specific comments that you want included in the letter, if you could either send those to me and Alex in advance or when we circulate the letter before it goes to the board, happy to incorporate any edits with your views on that in there.
Thank you. I will.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
And our next agenda item is the Regional Fair Housing Plan.
So I believe we have Joel Franklin online, so I'll pass it over to you, Joel.
Yeah, good evening. And I will actually turn it over to Hillary Chapman with the Council of Governments and Diane Glover, who is our consultant on the project, to kick off the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Joel. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Let's see, can everyone see this okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, good. So, good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you this evening. Hillary Chapman with the Council of Governments, as Joel just shared. First want to thank and acknowledge the 8 local governments and their staff who have come together to make this regional fair housing plan possible. In particular, of course, Joel Franklin, who you'll hear from shortly, as well as Jennifer Daniels and Roald Ned, who've been a critical part of our local government project team. And I'm thankful to be joined tonight here with Diane Glauber from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, who's the primary author for the draft plan that we'll be sharing with you this evening. Now, I assume that probably most of you are aware what the analysis of impediments to fair housing choices or the regional fair housing plan. But just in case, this is a plan that typically covers 5 years, designed to develop meaningful actions to overcome historic patterns of segregation, promote fair housing choice, and foster inclusive communities free from discrimination. And once this plan is fully approved at the local and federal level, it will guide investment decisions of federal funds in Arlington County and its partner governments to achieve the goals that are outlined, and you'll hear about shortly. So before I dive into the background and overview of some of the regional findings, just want to remind everyone why it's important to focus on fair housing and work to affirmatively further it, because this lack of choice can impact residents' lives. It's important to have access to high-performing schools, diverse communities, transportation options, and safe and healthy neighborhoods free from environmental contamination. So as I mentioned, we've got 8 local governments who have come together to be part of this team, including Arlington County. In Northern Virginia, the county is joined by the city of Alexandria, Fairfax County, Loudoun County, Prince William County, the District of Columbia, and on the Maryland side, city of Gaithersburg and Montgomery County. We've also been partnering as best we can with our local housing authority partners. And we have a fantastic consultant and federal technical assistance team that's been working with us since the very beginning. HUD has been partnering with us, provided technical assistance through Enterprise Community Partners. Our consultants that have been working with us to create our plan and support our Community Advisory Committee, led by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, who are also partnered with Urban Institute, who was our lead on our data collection and analysis, and Ochoa Urban Collaborative, who was the lead on our community engagement. Now, as I mentioned too, another key group that's been guiding the regional plans development is the Community Advisory Committee. And these groups shown here represent regionally working organizations who serve residents impacted by fair housing choice. And the advisory committee's role is to provide input to local governments and serve as a bridge to local communities throughout this process. And of course, then I just have to make sure I give a shout out to Kellen and the other NAACP chapters that have been part of this planning process since the beginning. So for context, the last time the region attempted to do a regional housing equity plan was over 25 years ago. And we have faced a number of different challenges over the years, beginning in 2018, but we are now moving into the final phase of the planning process. And I'll describe to you at the very end when we share next steps, where we are in our process and what we anticipate happening next. So the Fair Housing Plan includes sections that are region-wide, such as contributing factors to fair housing choice, as well as elements that are jurisdiction-specific. So the draft plan is a rich data set of information that has informed the draft goals proposed in this plan. This slide and a few that follow are just a few of the demographic data elements that are likely not a surprise or new information to any of you, but were foundational in the forming of Arlington County's goals and strategies. So first, a majority of residents in Arlington County are white, but the proportion of Arlington's residents have changed, racial identities have changed over time. Notably, the proportion of Asian or Pacific Islanders has grown over the past 2 decades. Spanish is the most prevalently spoken language by people with limited English proficiency, and relatedly, among non-US born residents, El Salvador is the most common country of origin. However, from 2015 to 2019, the proportion of Arlington County residents with limited English proficiency declined by 15%. So I'm going to share a couple of other maps, just 2 maps as well that are specific to Arlington County. The first is poverty rates by census tract. I just want to point your attention to the fact that the darker areas are areas with higher shares of people living in poverty levels. So the northwestern and eastern parts of the county have lower rates with many tracts less than 5%. And this is the source for this was the American Community Survey data back in 2019. Similarly, again, no surprise to anyone here, median rent, we mean this is the half of rents were for more than half or less. Darker areas indicate higher cost levels. So again, this is a map representing where those higher cost housing cost areas are. Almost 40% of the tracts have median rents of $2,000 a month or more, with 3 over $3,500 a month. So the among some of our region-wide findings on the community engagement side, we found that 84% of survey respondents noted that accessible and affordable housing is hard to find. The top barriers to housing choice that some of the participants identified, again, you'll hear from this again when we talk about our strategies. A lack of affordability is our top obstacle to fair housing choice in Arlington County and across metropolitan Washington. 2 of the other top barriers, government failure, meaning either lack of resources or lack of sufficient compliance for private actors, and racial discrimination. And under discrimination, 13% of respondents noted that they had experienced discrimination, and of that 13%, 41% reported that they believed landlords or property owners were responsible. Solutions that came out of our focus group discussions, a lot of them language-based, desire for more Spanish-speaking counselors and program materials in other languages besides English, expanding options for older adults to age in place, and also better compliance. Another region-wide finding within this report is, unfortunately, Arlington County and Metropolitan Washington has experienced increasing levels of segregation and significant disparities in access to opportunity by race and ethnicity since 1990. And this has been increasing, not plateauing or decreasing, which makes Metropolitan Washington, unfortunately, a little bit unique in the United States. Segregation is most severe, excuse me, is strongest between Black and white residents, and more moderate between Hispanic and white and Pacific Islanders. And by access to, we also see those same disparities to opportunity by race and ethnicity. And by opportunity, we're referring to access to good schools, highly proficient schools, healthy neighborhoods without environmental contamination, access to high capacity transit and jobs. And access is almost always lower for Black and Hispanic residents than white residents. So what are we going to do about this? We have proposed 7 regional goals and strategies. These goals and strategies apply not just to Arlington County, but all of the other partner local governments as well. Again, these are informed by a data-driven, qualitative and quantitative gathered multi-year planning process. These local goals will be implemented not just in Arlington County, but across the other local governments as well as the local goals. In addition to these shared goals, Arlington County, you'll hear from Joel shortly, also has its own goals that are specific to Arlington. And we chose these goals because we were concerned about making sure we had a limited number of goals that would be most impactful, rather than having many, many, many goals that might not be possible to achieve progress on in the next 5 years. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joel, who will walk you through what the actions are that Arlington County is proposing to address these barriers.
Great, thanks, Hillary. As you can see there, the first goal, which applies to Arlington as well as its neighboring jurisdiction, is increase the supply of housing that is affordable to families with incomes at 60% of area median income or below in the region, particularly in areas that have historically lacked such housing. Some of the strategies that we are all committed to working on together are listed here. This includes lowering the income targeting of housing affordable to people with incomes of 80% of area median down to 60% and below in order to address the chronic housing shortage for low-income individuals and families. Second, provide low-interest loans to single-family homeowners and grants to homeowners with households incomes up to 80% of area median income to develop accessory dwelling units with affordability restrictions on their property. Last one here is use local government financing and regulatory tools such as bonds, real estate transfer taxes, inclusionary zoning, as of right accessory dwelling units, public land set aside for affordable housing, expedited permitting and review, and relaxation of parking requirements for affordable housing developments. So the next slide is, in addition to the strategies that shared previously, Arlington County has committed to take additional actions that work towards this shared goal. The first recommendation is to continue to encourage developers to exceed the required number of affordable accessible units in a range of sizes and types when new development occurs. Persons with disabilities are more likely to live below the poverty line than persons without disabilities. So it is therefore recommended that Arlington continue to support and encourage the development of accessible units in a range of sizes. Second, deepen affordability of affordable housing. The data really shed light on the need to better match our affordable housing efforts to the needs of the communities. And as such, we will be looking for every opportunity to provide deeper affordability to meet the needs of households with incomes under 40% of the area median income. So this could include providing incentives for the inclusion of extremely affordable housing units in projects financed by the county, or when projects seek refinancing through the county, incorporate adjustments to the affordability covenants to increase the share of units dedicated to lower affordability, or engage with owners of existing affordable units to explore collaborative approaches to increase the share of units dedicated to these lower affordability levels. Also looking at exploring mechanisms to reduce county fees and related infrastructure costs for 100% affordable developments. Provide incentives or low interest loans for homeowners who rent their accessory dwellings to low and moderate income tenants. And lastly, as you're aware of, we are undertaking a new homeownership study that would take a step back from our homeownership programs to develop clear goals for our approach to homeownership and to rethink how best to achieve those defined outcomes. This could include reviewing existing homeownership programs and explore additional programs to support for prospective first-time homebuyers. Next slide is the second goal, which is to reform zoning and land use policies to expand access to fair housing choice by increasing the development, geographic distribution, and supply of affordable housing. The first strategy is to increase inclusionary zoning incentives for creating on-site affordable housing and increase fees in lieu of providing on-site affordable housing. Next is to adopt affordable housing overlay zones to increase the amount of land or developments that meet robust affordability criteria are allowed as of right. Lastly, here is incorporate a fair housing equity analysis into the review of significant rezoning proposals and significant specific plans. Next slide is Arlington specific, looking at initiating a zoning study to examine alternatives to the current definition of family in the zoning ordinance. So in response to the changing composition of families and households, the county will consider changes to the zoning ordinance to allow for a broader definition of family and households for occupancy purposes. These changes will allow for non-traditional families, extended families, and unrelated individuals, including older adults and persons with disabilities, to live together, potentially to reduce their housing costs, and in some cases more efficiently access services. Also, on this one, the data showed that a high percentage of older households are cost burdened and highlights increasing need for housing affordability for older households. While older adults are welcome in all committed affordable housing, developments targeted specifically to seniors could focus greater attention on their needs. So the recommendation is to initiate a study to examine how affordability requirements could be structured within the Arlington County zoning ordinance for senior housing projects approved via site plan. The focus will be meeting the affordability requirement through on-site units or beds, as this would be the best way to ensure low-income seniors benefit. Next slide, goal 3 is to implement preservation policies designed to preserve affordable housing and prevent displacement with a goal of no net loss of existing affordable rental units. So the regional strategy that really relates to Arlington on this one is to track affordable housing developments that have expiring subsidy contracts and then adopt a proactive outreach program and prioritize resources for the preservation of that housing. The next slide, specific to Arlington, we are going to periodically reevaluate the real estate tax relief program that's targeted to seniors and disabled homeowners, and look at it in regards to deferral versus exceptions, asset and income limits, and owners' housing costs to really preserve home ownership for the most vulnerable. We're also looking at exploring reopening the housing choice vouchers primary waiting list in order to solicit new income eligible households seeking rental subsidy supports. As you know, this federal subsidy is targeted to low income and extremely low income households through a deep rental subsidy. Also, something that's currently ongoing is a review of the housing grant program eligibility and maximum allowable rent. Are really evaluating the review of the housing grant program to identify the program's effectiveness in meeting the housing needs of extreme and low-income households and develop possible program adjustments. And lastly, here is consider developing a program to provide financial and technical support to low and moderate income homeowners for small repairs, estate planning, taxes, aging in place, and emergency relief. So goal 4 is increase the number of homeowners in the region and reduce inequities and discriminatory practices that limit homeownership opportunities by members of the protected classes. So regional strategies include increased homeownership opportunities for low and moderate income members of protected classes by ensuring affordable housing set-asides in new developments offer homeownership as well as rental. Supporting first-time homebuyers by expanding financial literacy programs and homebuyer education, and using innovative homeownership models such as cooperatives and community land trusts, as well as supporting current homeowners with protected characteristics, including racial and ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, and seniors through increased funding for repair, rehab, and renovation programs for products. Expanding programs that provide energy efficiency improvements to lower utility costs and provide comprehensive foreclosure prevention counseling and legal referrals. So goal 5, the next slide, is protect the housing rights of individuals and strengthen fair housing education. So regional strategies include reduce barriers to accessing rental housing by eliminating application fees for voucher holders and encourage landlords to follow HUD's guidance on the use of criminal backgrounds in screening tenants. Also look at piloting a right to counsel program to really ensure legal representation for tenants in landlord-tenant proceedings. And lastly on this one, is expand and increase support for fair housing outreach, education, and enforcement. Next slide, specific to Arlington, we want to test for housing discrimination based on disability status in at least one of the fair housing tests in the next 5 years, and continued tests for housing discrimination based on race and national origin. Provide education and outreach to potential first-time homebuyers about fair housing laws, and using HUD certified trainers, homebuyer education, credit repair education, as well as expand marketing to first-generation potential homebuyers to make sure they're aware of programs and funding for which they may be eligible, including information in commonly spoken languages. Also looking at making the fair housing provisions in the county's human rights ordinance consistent with the Fair Housing Act and Virginia's Fair Housing Law. And lastly, reduce language barriers when seeking housing services, ensuring marketing materials for funded projects are available to different consumer needs. Goal 6 is increase community integration and reduce housing barriers for persons with disabilities. So this includes prioritizing home and CDBG funds for developments that include permanent supportive housing units, negotiating project-based voucher contracts for a portion of affordable units, and inclusionary developments, and set aside a portion of such project-based vouchers units for permanent supportive housing. Advocating for public housing authorities to adopt admission preferences for individuals with disabilities who are institutionalized or at risk of institutionalization. And lastly, advocate for new multifamily developments with public funds to have at least 10% of total units accessible to persons with mobility disabilities and at least 4% accessible for persons with hearing and or visual disabilities. And for Arlington, we want to ensure that all accessible units and future committed affordable units provide the same features as standard units. So accessible units should not be qualitatively different from standard units in the same building. Any in-unit amenity provided to tenants, such as in-unit laundry, shall be provided in accessible units. Second, look at developing a rental accessibility modification program and identify funding to provide technical assistance and grants to assist low and moderate income renters with physical or sensory disabilities to complete accessible modifications to their primary residence. And lastly, explore the possibility of entering into a memorandum of agreement with the state's Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services to administer the state rental assistance program. Goal 7 is expand access and affordability of public transportation for members of the protected classes. Strategies include providing free bus transportation to low-income households and to study and make recommendations to improve and expand bus routes across borders, ensure that members of protected classes can access jobs in employment centers. An additional Arlington goal is to increase effectiveness of existing programs to further fair housing. This includes the review of current metrics for goals, the Affordable Housing Master Plan goals, and implement an equity analysis with metrics across program areas as we develop new programs. We also want to develop a plan and mechanisms for collecting reliable demographic data on residents of committed affordable housing. The county does not currently have a reliable mechanism for collecting this information on residents beyond household income. So in order to better understand who is being served by our affordable housing, the county will need to engage with owners of committed affordable housing to develop this mechanism for collecting things such as age, race, ethnicity, and household size. The existing Affordable Housing Investment Fund policy, as you're aware, does have a policy to firmly further fair housing by having the goal of not further concentrating low and moderate income households. The current funding criteria for investment includes a geographic distribution category. Given Arlington's low poverty rate, there are no racially or ethnically concentrated areas of poverty as defined by HUD, but we could be potentially overlooking some areas. So the county is looking at a modified definition, which is where the non-white population of a census tract is reduced from 50% to 46% or higher, and looking at poverty rate reduced from 40% to 15%. And this is something that we are looking at possibly including in the NOFA. So I will now turn it back over to Hillary to go over next steps and close out the presentation.
Thanks, Joel. Just want to make sure, bring everyone up to speed in terms of where we are in the planning process and when you might expect to hear back from us about it. The public comment period was open for 60 days. It did close on March 31st. We are now embarking on the process of reviewing and incorporating those comments and making edits to the plan. And then from during May to July, we will, in 6 of the 8 governments, embark on a legislative review process. 2 local governments, the District of Columbia and Prince William County, will be going through an administrative review process. And then we'll go through a final copy edit with the Urban Institute before it is sent off formally to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. We are aiming to complete that process by September of this year. So, and there's some contact information here on the screen. You can email us at COG or Joel directly. Phone numbers are here. And for more information, you can go to COG's Fair Housing webpage or Arlington County's webpage itself. And with that, I'm happy to take any other comments or questions that you may have.
Thank you, Hillary, and thank you, Joel. I do just first want to express my thanks to Joel, Hillary, Diane, and all the staff for the county, as well as COG, the consultants who worked on this plan. So the Arlington County plan is, I think, 160 pages, roughly. It's a lot. It's hard to read it all in one sitting, but I would encourage commissioners who have not had a chance to read it yet to do so, because it has just a wealth of information about where things stand in the county, as well as just detailed recommendations for how things can improve. I think that the team has done a fantastic job with this report. It's a huge step forward from where the county has been, and I think where the region has been on these fair housing issues. I look at this sort of akin to the Affordable Housing Master Plan, but basically the Fair Housing Master Plan for the county. There are some things that I have some recommendations on, including that aren't in there, and some comments, but I think overall this is a fantastic report. I do have concerns, and we expressed that in the budget letter, about the ability of the county with current staffing levels to implement everything that's in there. It's a lot. It's all very much needed, and it's great, but county staff is already stretched pretty thin, and to implement all of these, I think it's 5 years is the implementation period, correct? Yep. It's going to take a lot of effort, both from just an implementation, also from community consultation and engagement on the different aspects of it moving forward. So I applaud the county and COG and the consultants for the great work that they put into this. And I think it's going to be a big effort to work with the county on implementation after it's approved by the board. Hopefully, it sounds like before July. And just a quick note on why public comment ended at the end of March, why it's before us now. We couldn't fit it on our agenda in March. We had too much going on. But even though the comments for the regional portion are basically closed, and talking to county staff, there is an opportunity for us to at least provide comments on the Arlington portion of it, those goals and strategies, and things that we recommend that they incorporate or potentially change or consider. So that's why it's coming before you. And I just really wanted to make sure that the commission had a presentation and had an opportunity to ask questions and learn more about this, because I do think it's flown under the radar, despite the very extensive engagement and outreach effort that took place over the last 2 years. I think most people have never heard of this and don't know what's happening, but it is, I think, very significant and a great thing for our community. So I do have a number of comments and things, but I would defer to other commissioners first if there's questions or feedback they wanted to provide.
One comment I have is just, great plan, all the 6, 7 steps and strategies, but how also with the county bit, how is it going to work? We want to get information out with the schools. There's 18-year-olds in high school, and if they get this information, kids are now on Instagram, everything like that, to get this information out to get the next generation of people working on housing issues, because I know people that grew up here just can't afford here, and that's sad. It's a great place to grow up, but if we start sooner and not just, oh, they come back from school. No, let's get it out sooner with the schools, and hopefully that will help, disseminate the information more, because maybe the people in schools are the ones helping the parents do all that information. And it'd be great for them to have this information rather than the parents are trying to figure out, because it's interesting from 2015 to 2019, the decrease in, limited proficiency in English, I believe. I feel it's also the rise of the internet and social media. People are just using that a lot more to communicate.
So Sarah, is that you're sort of asking about outreach efforts on fair housing in general to high school students and students, or specifically about the plan and sort of engagement efforts?
Engagement efforts, why aren't there's more, and maybe there is, and I don't know, maybe I missed it, but with the school systems, the kids are sometimes advocates for their parents in certain situations, And so get them involved in it, to know about it. If you just said it goes under the radar, that engagement, I think, working with the school systems. And in addition to mention that the county is already in at the schools. Arlington's really good schools.
So I guess, Joel, is there a plan to do engagement with APS students around fair housing and around the issues that are in this plan, either before it's approved or after implementation, to make sure that they understand fair housing issues, they understand kind of what role as they're entering, I guess, adult society once they turn 18, and the political process, like what role they can play in it, as well as just helping to educate their parents on what's happening.
Yeah, if they're voters at 18, and if they're still in high school at that point, but in 5 years it'll be 23, and there's no affordable housing in Arlington. Yikes.
So outreach for this effort was extensive, but it has ended. So I mean, Hillary and Diane can talk to that, but as it gets implemented, many of these are going to have to go under their own planning efforts, right? So they are going to require an engagement process through that planning effort. So there will be additional opportunities for to get those people involved.
And I think, Joel, more broadly, maybe the suggestion is looking at, if we're stepping up fair housing education and outreach, to make sure that we're including students and people under 18 as part of that. I don't know that there is any fair housing education or outreach in the county that's geared towards people under 18. But I think
kids can be emancipated and they can fair housing, and they're 18 in school and high school. So
well, especially for families where the adults have more limited English and they're receiving information from their children, that could be another avenue to help ensure that we're addressing some of the gap in understanding of fair housing laws and the rights that people have.
All right, good suggestion. Thank you.
I have a bunch of questions. So do you want to just kind of do one or two at a time, or?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, hey, thanks so much for the presentation. Since public comment has closed, are you able to tell us how much public comment you received and how much kind of needs to get worked through?
I have that number, but I would have to look it up and get it back to you on
Okay,
it.
no problem.
I'm sorry. I would say I will make the general observation that sort of region-wide, those communities that had that were engaging with their community around housing in general had more comments than those that were not. So, for example, Arlington County, City of Alexandria, and others, I think proportionally compared to some of the other jurisdictions that are part of this plan, had more comments. No surprise, some of those comments were about missing middle, not about this plan. I want to say, no, it's not, and of course the number of comments we received were nowhere in the same universe. I'm sure that missing middle received. So I would say there was probably a couple of hundred comments total, and how many of those were specific to Arlington County, I would have to go back and check, but I'm happy to do that.
Okay, awesome. The next one was, I appreciated the focus on increasing the supply of 60%. I know public comment has closed, but maybe for the Arlington specific version, I think many of us on this commission, month after month, we're pushing to get those committed affordable units, on site, or so yeah, it's kind of like half the battle to increase the supply of them. But then also, if we're just concentrating poverty, we end up with situations like Serrano. There's properties in Green Valley, or just different examples across the county. There's great examples in DC and Montgomery County, and really across the nation on inclusionary zoning, which I appreciated seeing. And when you grow up and you don't see opportunity around you, you might be led to believe that opportunity doesn't exist for you, or for people that look like you, or you don't have the same opportunities as other people. I also think it develops a deeper sense of empathy when we can all live together. It develops greater tolerance. There's so many great reasons why we have to have us all together and not segregated like we've been for so long. That's more of a comment than a question. And then Hillary, could you tell us, how does Arlington compare to the other governments? We heard you talk about online comment or public comment participation, but as far as the initiatives that we've taken, are they kind of in line with what the rest of the governments are doing? Are we kind of out in front? Are we behind? How do we compare?
I can take this, Hillary.
Okay, yeah, okay, thanks.
I think you're doing really well. In fact, you have far more county goals than any other jurisdiction. Some were struggling to put down 3 or 4. I think, Jill, I lost count, but there's a lot. I think that you're doing, I liked your comments. When you have a chance to look at the plan, one of our recommendations, and I'm glad your developer friends left, was to have inclusionary zoning on site, because you have these opportunities, and not do it, off-site or payment. We would like to actually disincentivize developers from paying into a fund and providing them on site. So that's a very clear recommendation in the plan. I think you've done some really good zoning work as well. We put in the equity analysis, I think, because of Amazon for one, to really get a sense of how the displacement and gentrification that would be caused by this very large development. We're not anti-development by any stretch, don't get me wrong, but it can be done in a way as like a win-win for everyone.
Awesome, I love that. And I just want to give a shout out to staff and Joel. Thanks for all that you're doing. I really appreciate kind of hearing that we're on the forefront. I always think that in Arlington, we are so well resourced that we really should be leading the region and the nation. I do wonder, how is Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments collaborating with other regional governments to see if we're in line with like industry, best practices, and if we're on the cutting edge of what's happening?
I'll just go one more time, Hillary, while you gather yourself, because you have to represent everyone, and I could be a little more biased, right? But I can't tell you how gratified I was to read, Arlington and single family only zoning in the headlines. I mean, that's a really big deal. And our recommendations would, especially with the ADUs, would basically outlaw single family zoning everywhere. I mean, Virginia's a tougher nut to crack than Maryland or DC because of home rule, etc. But you were able to do it, and I just really applaud you. I do a lot of work in California. I wrote the Los Angeles plan, for example, and I just finished Napa and Sonoma. So they're already, as a state, leaps and bounds ahead of other states. But I have to say, Arlington has really been a great leader in fair housing.
So I appreciate that. Can I keep going? I have a couple more.
Sure. Awesome. And also, Hillary, did you have a response to that as well?
Well, I was just going to add, I would say that in the lead up to this collaboration, there is, of course, so COG is an association of local governments. There's also an association of regional councils nationwide. And so definitely have been in touch with colleagues at regional councils in Chicago, Metropolitan Area Planning Council, so MAPC in Boston, ARC, Atlanta Regional Commission. These are, and also Mid-Ohio Regional Commission. So these are all regional governments that are doing, interesting regional housing collaborations along those lines. And so I have certainly learned a lot from and I think this region has also benefited from our conversations with folks in Chicago and Boston and Atlanta.
Awesome.
Can I just, because this is well timed, so I just want to thank you enormously, because actually I was in the city of Alexandria involved in the 25 years ago, last time you tried to do this, and was also involved in watching these jurisdictions sort of not collaboratively work together and sort of try and pass the poor people around across the border to sort of get rid of them, basically. Back 25 years ago, there was our fair share analysis that was going on that was rather disturbing. So I'm enormously gratified to see it come together at a regional level, because this region is, particularly, we've talked about this, that Arlington loses a lot of their potential homeowners because their renters can't afford to buy. So they go out to Loudoun, or they go out to far out Fairfax, because that's the only place they can afford to buy. So having this done in this collaborative regional way is hopefully helping us figure out a better way of doing that than just shipping people further out. So thank you very, very much.
Just a couple more comments from me, and then I guess one question. On page 17, the goals, I appreciated that we listed them out, but I just kind of felt like they're a little too broad. I think we could have added a little bit more specificity in there. One of the goals was, increase the number of affordable and accessible units. Outstanding goal, but when are we going to do that, and how many units are we going to do it by? And then there's another goal was target deeper affordability. Again, I think those all sound great, but if we kind of challenge ourselves to say we're going to target deeper affordability by doing this by this date, at least we have something to measure. I was surprised not to see Plan Langston Boulevard anywhere in the presentation, but again, we can continue that conversation. Mr. Chair, where did we end up with source of income discrimination?
So I think that's included in the Arlington County specific strategy or goal around making sure that our human rights ordinance complies with the Virginia housing law.
Gotcha.
Or fair housing law.
Okay, so we're still kind of, is it waiting on an update?
It still hasn't happened. I don't know. I don't know if Joel or anyone has an update on where that it's been in process for like a year or more. I think the county attorney is still negotiating with the Human Rights Office or something, but it's taking a long time.
Yeah, I don't think, unless Jennifer has an update, I don't have anything beyond that.
Okay. The disability, I appreciated the goals on that, but we've had conversations with this commission, and developers have looked us right in the eye and said, well, we're just following the law. And so I appreciate that we're going to advocate for that 10 and 6%, but what are going to be the strategies? How are we going to incentivize developers to come to the table so that we're not, having to advocate? Because again, they looked us right in our eye and just said, yeah, well, we're just following the law. My last question is, we've seen really great examples of churches being converted into affordable housing across Arlington County. And I was surprised that we didn't really see some more of that, maybe even across the Council of Government. I think faith communities in general have evolved, definitely in the last decade, but certainly, in the pandemic, we've modernized things. And I think there's an opportunity. I think a lot of churches would be willing to, use their property for a cause like affordable housing. We have great examples of that. So those are my comments. Overall, really impressed, and I know it's going to be a long road ahead. So thank you for all that you're doing. Really appreciate it.
Could I just address your last comment quickly? I don't know if there's enough inventory, but one thing we're seeing a lot of, and in fact, California, of course, just passed legislation, is the conversion of office buildings and retail into affordable housing. And I know in the DC section, that's one of our recommendations in the downtown area, to bring inclusionary zoning there, because there is that opportunity for conversion. And I think that might be a trend in the future.
Awesome.
Thank you. I have some comments, recommendations as well. One of the ones kind of going to what Sarah was mentioning about schools. In the plan, they talk about the disparities by race and ethnicity in access to high-performing schools and schools with higher test scores in math and reading. But there's no goals or strategies around addressing that. And that's, in my view, a pretty significant challenge, that's really based off of where people live, dictates how good of a school they get to go to in Arlington. And I would really love to see something in the plan about working with APS to try and address that consistent challenge that we've had in Arlington. I don't know if there's any response, Joel, or anyone that you have on that.
I mean, I think we will continue to seek out collaboration with public schools. We worked with them on the race and equity training program. We both have kind of these looking at things through the racial equity lens. But I think we will take that comment into suggestion. Thank you.
Additionally, this is something that has come before our commission multiple times with tenants, and that's the fear of reprisal. And in the report, speaking with Spanish-speaking residents, they've revealed that fear of reprisal is a major issue in their not reporting housing discrimination or substandard housing conditions. Again, this is something, there's no goal or strategy that really seeks to address this directly. And I think given how much this commission and other advocacy groups have heard that from residents, that they're afraid to speak out and they're afraid to report issues because they fear reprisal. And we also saw in the report that there's a significant number of residents in the DC metro area, at least who took the survey, who don't report cases of housing discrimination. And some of the reason is because they fear retaliation. So I think having a goal or strategy that specifically addresses that and talks about what steps the county can take to, whether it's education or, working more closely with the Office of Human Rights and landlords and others to, step up enforcement and outreach when it comes to our fair housing law or ordinance, and just making sure people are aware of their rights and that they feel safe reporting issues and substandard conditions as well as violations of the Fair Housing Act. Again, if you have a response on that, feel free to. If not, that's fine too. I can move on to the next one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so education obviously is a big part of our recommendations, and we do look to expand on that through, outreach that includes workshops and materials, education on the current legislation that outlawed discrimination on source of income. I know, the other thing we work with nonprofits such as Bugata to, if there's, a fear of government, it's sometimes easier to work through nonprofit groups. So we do that as well. But thank you for the comment.
Yep, definitely looking for more things, because I think what we're doing today isn't fixing the problem. It's helping, but it's not, it's not solved. One of the other things, so the county had as part of their draft goals to increase the protected characteristics that are included as part of the fair housing testing. And I think the county, at least in the proposed budget, is planning to do fair housing testing in the next FY24 budget. But the county only included in the plan adding disability to race, ethnicity, and national origin, which are what have historically been tested for in Arlington. And I think the only things that have been tested in the last at least like 10 or so years. There's 11 protected classes in Virginia. I think just adding one more isn't sufficient, especially given that the report emphasizes that source of income discrimination is one of the top discrimination concerns that was raised in the report. I think that the county should at least consider adding testing around that, if not other categories as well, because we know that there's other discrimination that's happening. It's good to add disability, but I don't think that's nearly sufficient. So that's another item. Joel, any comment?
Yeah, sure. I think, I think what we heard through the process was that there was the very interest in testing on disability, and that there was fear of discrimination there. But point well taken, and I think there is some interest, I think, in expanding that given recent comments. So thank you.
And then I think lastly, the report, I know it was a struggle during the public engagement process to really engage with the LGBTQ plus groups in the DC metro region. I know it was a struggle in the advisory committee too, is getting people to serve on that. But it does talk about how, at least from the focus group, that there were a number of concerns that were raised about the specific challenges facing members of the LGBTQ plus community when it comes to housing. So as part of that, it said that LGBTQ plus youth face higher rates of homelessness. Again, Arlington does not conduct fair housing testing based on sexual orientation or gender identity. And then in general, concern that many Northern Virginia localities, including Arlington, are sending LGBTQ plus youth to DC for housing support because the communities like Arlington lack specific specialized programs, whether that's our homelessness services programs or general housing programs that don't offer anything specific to members of the LGBTQ plus, thank you, community, as well as the need for specialized housing services for LGBTQ plus youth and seniors. Again, I think it's great that the report highlights those needs, but there's nothing in the Arlington goals and strategies that seeks to address that. And I think that's definitely something that's important for the county to look into and see where there are areas for especially vulnerable and especially looking at the trans community where you see a lot more discrimination and higher risk of homelessness and violence and all those things, making sure that we're doing enough to support that community and not outsourcing that to DC that has more of these programs in place. I think that's pretty critical for Arlington to explore as well.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. So I've reached out to the Department of Human Services on this, and they are, looking at updating, their strategic plan to end homelessness. So there are some opportunities to look at, what additional goals or strategies might be needed there as far as any specialized housing that might be needed by that population.
Thank you. Any other? Oh, yes, I'm sorry, Doris.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First thing I want to say is, wow, thank you. As far as the regional plan and particularly Arlington, thank you to the COG people and the Lawyers Committee and everybody who worked on it. And thank you, Joel, and your team, because what I see is you listened to people in the civic engagement, and it shows in the plan that you put together, the goals and objectives. And then I want to mention that I did take note of the different jurisdictions, and I would agree with you. Their goals and objectives. I would agree with you that Arlington outstripped everybody in terms of seeing what the need was for a fair housing plan, and somebody is also looking at the proposed AFFA rule that's AFF, the federal proposed rule, because when I was reading that, I kept thinking COG, I kept thinking this region, I kept thinking Arlington. So the one thing I agree with Callan, we have to be testing on more of the groups, but I really appreciate your hearing us about testing for disability, because we weren't being tested, and one of the real concerns is that that in this region, for sure, we aren't at least in Virginia, we aren't enforcing, and our code enforcement is not enforcing the Fair Housing Act accessibility requirements. And unless we test in the state of Virginia when the permits of first occupancy are about to be approved, if we don't test then and for the next 2 years, then violations of the Fair Housing Act are not caught, and it's put in the lap of the person with a disability. And so then I wanted to ask, having looked at the proposed fair housing rule, the HUD rule, coming up, what the process is here going forward. What I mean is, if I understood what Diane said in the listening session that we held for the disability community, once this regional plan is approved, then it'll be used for the next consolidated plan process, and instead of what was the AI, and so in Arlington, do we know when that 5-year process is going to be starting that will use this plan? And then after that process, as I understand it, by sometime going forward into the next 5 years, that the required equity plan through the rule, the HUD rule, the new HUD rule, will be what we're going to be using to prepare the equity plan going forward, and that will influence the next cycle of the consolidated plan. Is that correct? And for Arlington, when might that happen?
So I can at least jump in that our current con plan goes through 2026. Diane, I don't know if you have information on what that means for us.
There's a phase-in period, which can be as late as 2029 for jurisdictions that have completed a plan within 3 years of the final AFFH rule, which is currently out for comment. You will have quite a bit of time. Now, we knew the rule was coming. It's for those that don't know, the 2015 AFFH rule was rescinded by the Trump administration, and then HUD recently reissued the rule, has a comment period going on. Now, it's instead of calling it an assessment of fair housing, it's called an equity plan. There are some differences and some really good differences, like a complaint process, which was never part of this. We planned by doing this in the format of an assessment of fair housing. We in fact were more comprehensive than HUD will require in the future. And that was done intentionally. So whereas the format might change and there's some differences in citizen participation and community engagement and so on, the questions that we've answered are more onerous than the questions if the new equity plan. In fact, you might have read all excruciating 45 contributing factors that still haunt me in the middle of the night that HUD is no longer requiring. So what you have now is more information than you'll need. I don't know the exact dates, but assuming the 3 years in the comp plan of 2026, we're probably looking at 2028. And boy, do I wish I wouldn't be working in 2028, but you never know. But so it is going to be quite a ways away.
Okay, and the one question that I had also that I made comments on was the fact that there was a regional goal regarding increasing the percentage of accessible and affordable units, but accessible units. And the word public housing or publicly sponsored housing was used. And what's happening is right now, two things. One is just for the Commission's information, the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development is going to have a public hearing on Friday, April 21. And if you don't already have it, I can send the announcement that I got today. And sounds like they're using the old process, but this is when they're doing, this is the year, I guess, for their 5-year plan. And my understanding is they'll have to come under the new HUD rule. But is that the place, Diane, where we would go if we were encouraging what I think is the simplest and most eloquent way of increasing the percentage of accessible units, which is to modify the building code in Virginia to increase that percentage, preferably at 10%, because we've got a lot of time to make up in terms of having a stock of accessible housing. But what involvement do you think we should have with the state process this year? And I will say that I was at a meeting of the State Legislative Disability Commission on Tuesday, and they are actually looking at this issue of the stock of accessible housing and other housing related matters for legislation that could come up next year in the General Assembly. So,
well, I encourage you to
so that's that, what I, that's why I want to see that in our plans, that goal, or objective.
Well, because it would require a state process. We're trying to limit our plan to what we can do, as a jurisdiction and a region, because we don't have I personally have no control of what the state of Virginia does, and it doesn't mean you stop the advocacy, but we wanted to have goals that were measurable, that we're able to achieve versus a state goal. So that was our purpose. I certainly encourage you. And I worked in the Santa Monica plan, and we were able to double the percentage of set aside units for both the set aside units, and we changed the building code, but that's because it was a city building code. We didn't have to change the California building code, which would be a much heavier lift, as it will be in Virginia.
So it would be similar to Atlanta and the state of Georgia? They have their own building code, right?
Yeah, you would go to where if there's a Virginia building code that needs changing, that would be a state process. That is really outside the scope of this, but it doesn't mean you should stop advocating on a state
But
level.
the word public supported housing is the problem that I had, because that means there's, see, what we're talking about with the building code is it could be everything. It could be affordable projects and or it could be, you know, completely private projects if the building code were changed from 2%.
It could, but don't forget that this spans 3 different states/DC, and we had to come up with common language for all of these very different jurisdictions. So we can't really mandate all housing everywhere just because of the control factor. But since publicly supported housing is under the domain of each housing department, right? That gives more control at a local level than housing generally.
So the last thing I'll say is that I saw in the HUD proposal, though, that it is it's discriminatory. There'll be policies that might be in state law or state ordinances that, as well as local laws and ordinances, that may need to be changed in order to provide equity on any number of issues. And it looks like they are saying that it is one of the important goals and objectives that would be appropriate in the new equity plans.
Well, if the state wants to hire us, which I would be very surprised about, you know, we're happy to advocate for state policies, but that's really, they will be responsible for affirmatively furthering fair housing at a state level. That's sort of outside this process.
Well, thank you for that.
Thank you, Doris. Nikki, did you have a question?
Will there be a HUD comment period? Like, what's their role? Just this or reality?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, well, I'm just kind of curious, like, what is HUD's role in this? If you have to submit the plan to HUD, like, will there be a HUD comment period, or do they just approve it as like a formality?
So yes, we do need to submit the plan to HUD. I'm not sure if they are, it's not, we technically don't have to do it at this point until the rule goes into effect, but we are coming together as a region because it's the right thing to do. So HUD doesn't necessarily approve it right now, correct, Diane?
They don't. However, HUD is looking at this plan as sort of a model for the future equity plans, and it is the largest regional plan to date. HUD has been at the table since day one, and they very much want to see this plan and use it as an example for other jurisdictions.
And then, so I haven't read it yet, so I'm gonna limit my comments so far. But so there's a 5-year implementation period. So does that mean all of the goals are expected to be achieved in 5 years, or do some of the goals have specific different timeframes?
You will have to report on the progress of the goals in your annual plan, and Joel, feel free to jump in. So it will be monitored on an annual basis, but since your con plan, it usually is the period of a con plan. I mean, Arlington, you recently submitted a fair housing plan not that long ago.
No, it's been some time since we submitted one, so.
Okay, so some haven't submitted it in 10 years. I know that in some, like, in a longer period than that. And I know for DC, it was submitted, 6 years ago, because we worked on it 5-6 years ago. So it's a little bit of no man's land right now because the rule isn't in effect. And currently the only requirement is to conduct a analysis of impediments, which has virtually no guidance since the rule was rescinded. So we're sort of on the fly, but once it's submitted, Jennifer and Joel will need to report on the progress in their annual plan and have another one, you know, after the next consolidated plan.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments or questions before we entertain a motion? So this is for action. My recommendation would be, and I tried to jot down the comments that we had, to make a motion to recommend approval to the county board of the plan. I mean, I know it's not in final form yet, but at least
Support for it.
yes, support for the plan, and then just include our recommendations. I can briefly recap what those are based on what I heard, if people think anything is missing. So the first one, include fair housing education / outreach to APS students. Second, adds more specificity around some of the goals, specifically referencing deeper affordability, as well as more affordable housing creation. Also having strategies around more accessible units. Working with churches on, that's number 4, working with churches on affordable housing. Number 5, collaborate with APS and on disparity on access to high-performing schools. 6, add additional fair housing testing areas. 7, add a goal or strategy around addressing fear of retaliation among tenants. 8, add a goal or strategy around addressing LGBTQ+ housing services.
What I would like to add where Diane mentioned to put in where to really enforce the availability of on-site housing in new developments than just giving them money that will not be provided for 3+ years. Like, to really make it a focus of more on-site housing for these like luxury developments.
Okay, I think the challenge of that goes to the requires state legislation to change it, but
That's what I was gonna say, I don't know that we have control over that.
yeah, I mean, we can still put it in the letter and say it's important to the housing commission, but it's not something that I think Arlington. But they can certainly make it a legislative priority to change the affordable housing ordinance.
Yeah.
Or law.
Something like
Okay. Anything else?
Just 2 things. Should we re-push source of income? And then I think if we use houses of worship, might be a little more inclusive than churches.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, this isn't the exact language. This is just my notes jotted down. So this will go in the draft letter, send it out to everyone. We'll make edits to it. I'm always happy to push source of income because that's been a pet peeve of mine with the county for years now, going on 3. So happy to include that, making sure that that gets added to the county's human rights ordinance. Anything else?
Could I just make a point? Is that because we have regional goals and then we have jurisdictional goals. We are not able to revise the regional goals because that would mean going back to the other jurisdictions and then it would be a free-for-all and we would never finish. So these recommendations can either go in the body as to add more information or would become part of Arlington's goals. I just want to make that distinction.
Yes, this is just recommending that the county consider these as part of the local Arlington goals.
yeah.
Do I have a motion to approve a letter in support with the 10 recommendations?
I'll make a motion to approve creating a letter to send to the county board on this regional fair housing plan.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, let's do roll call. That's okay. Then start with myself. I vote yes. Commissioner Montgomery?
Yes.
Commissioner Norris?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Commissioner Surface?
Yes.
Commissioner Blake?
Yes.
Commissioner McGilvray?
Yes.
Commissioner Heminger?
Yes.
Commissioner Edwards?
Yes.
Commissioner Rubalcava?
Yes.
Commissioner Brown?
I think you jumped.
Do we lose Paul? Okay. And it passes unanimously. Thank you all. And I know we have 15 minutes to consider Park Arlington before Karen has to leave and we lose quorum. Sorry about that. But thank you, Hillary, Diane, and Joel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For the next item, I'm passing it over to Melissa Danowski with the Housing Division for Park Street.
Thank you so much. Just one moment while I get this set up. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. Thank you and good evening. I'm Melissa Danowski with the Housing Division, and Stephen Kahn with Standard Communities is also here. And after providing a brief presentation, I'll hand it to him to give a short presentation and to help answer any questions. The owner of Park Arlington, Standard Communities and Foundation Housing, referred to as the borrower, are requesting a $34.9 million AHIF loan to renovate Park Arlington Apartments, which contains 294 units and built in 1954. The total AHIF loan includes the previous allocations approved at both the July 2021 and October 2022 county board meetings, as well as the $6 million loan used to assist in the purchase of the property by Standard and Foundation back in 2017. And it also includes a $540,000 deposit that was used to exercise an option to purchase the southern parcel, which is no longer being pursued. The total loan also includes a request for an additional up to $3 million as part of this county board action. So staff recommends.
We're still on the first slide.
Oh, it didn't switch? You don't see the pictures?
We do not.
Uh-oh. Okay. Let me stop sharing and reshare.
There we go.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
All right. So in order to not mess with it, I might have to leave this little box up here, but all right, hopefully this will work. 1 second. So I think I was just at the end of this, which is that staff recommends approval of the up to $3 million AHIF loan allocation and associated loan documents for the $34.9 million AHIF loan, as well as an additional TAF allocation of $181,000, which is in addition to the $124,000 approved at the July 2021 meeting. Do you now see a map?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And as a reminder, sorry about that. As a reminder, the site is located at 4510 31st Street South in the Arlington neighborhood. It's bordered by Fort Reynolds Park to the west and the Arlington County Trade Center to the north. I-395 is located to the south of the property. Okay, so in this table, you can see the sources and uses for the proposed renovations at Park Arlington and the changes since October 2022, which is when this last came before the county board. The anticipated costs or uses are on the bottom part of the table. So some costs increased while others decreased. For example, construction costs decreased by about $3.1 million. And the decrease is largely attributable to updated pricing from subcontractors. The updated pricing removed excess cushion that was in the October bids due to the uncertainties of when renovations would begin. And in addition, there were modifications to the construction scope, which helped reduce the anticipated financing gap, which was due to increased interest rates, which I'll get to in a moment. Examples include carpeting in the bedrooms, as opposed to vinyl tile, and repair of a pool fence rather than replacement, to name a couple. And the project will continue to meet Virginia housing and county renovation standards. Although construction costs decreased, there was an increase in other costs since the October 2022 county board meeting, including the project and debt reserves, which increased, and acquisition costs increased. But please note the increased acquisition costs is due to changes in the financing structure and increased costs associated with the transaction. The purchase price did not change since October 2022 and is still $85 million. And lastly, the developer fee increased by 1.28 million to a total 4.28 million fee. The developer fee serves as a contingency for the project budget and is typically sized to reflect the size and complexity of the deal. In this case, the developer fee, which was sized in 2021, is below what staff would likely size it today and also below what the tax credit investor is requiring. Specifically, the cash developer fee, or what the borrower would receive at closing, of 2.5 million, or approximately 8,500 a unit, is still below the average cash fee per unit for similar projects since 2016, which was 19,000 per unit. So in return, the borrower will be responsible for any additional gap of unforeseen costs post-closing and during construction. And so there are also changes in the project's sources since October 2022, and the most significant change is a 7.1 million reduction in the senior mortgage, which was due to rising interest rates. Although the low-income housing tax credit equity increased by about 1.4 million to help offset this mortgage reduction, there was still a 6.1 million financing gap since that October meeting. And staff recommends an up to $3 million additional AHIF allocation to help fill this gap. And then the borrower will contribute the remaining up to 3.1 million through an increased seller note to the project. And if there are any improvements in the tax credit equity available to the project or other cost savings prior to closing on the additional up to $3 million AHIF loan, the county and Standard will equally reduce the amount of AHIF and their seller note that would be needed for the project. In addition, any gap over 6.1 million would be funded directly by the borrower, and in no circumstance will the additional AHIF needed for the project exceed the up to 3 million allocation request. So in total, the borrower is requesting a 34.9 million AHIF loan, and other than the increased AHIF loan amount, the AHIF terms reflect the AHIF loan terms approved at the October 2022 meeting. And it will have a 40-year loan term at a 0.5% interest rate. And repayments are from residual receipts cash flow, which will be split 50-50 with the developer. And the borrower proposes a renovation method that would allow all existing tenants to remain at the property during renovations. It is anticipated that any individual unit may take approximately 3 weeks to renovate, and the renovations are going to be phased. And there was a tenant relocation plan that was approved at the July 13th, 2022 county board meeting. And consistent with the county's TAF policy, a tenant assistance fund policy, TAF will be available for all eligible households at the existing Park Arlington apartments. At the July 2021 county board meeting, a $124,000 TAF was approved. And since that time, the 60% AMI levels have increased about 10.3%, which impacted those estimates, and did result in an additional allocation request of about 181,000. Because the tenants would remain on site during the renovations, the TAF would be used to assist eligible residents in paying any increases in rent for 2 years post renovations. In terms of the timeline and pending approval of the staff recommendations by the county board, finance closing would occur in late April or May 2023. So this April or May, and renovations will occur this summer and take approximately 2 years to complete. And to conclude, staff does recommend approval of the updated loan documents and an additional up to $3 million AHIF allocation towards the renovation for a total 34.9 million AHIF loan, as well as an additional $181,640 in TAF funds. Thanks, and I can now turn it over to Stephen Kahn with Standard.
Thanks, Melissa, and thanks to everybody for being here. I know it's getting a little late, so I'll try not to drone on too much. I think many of you have heard from me before. We've been involved with Park Arlington for a little over 5 years now, always in coordination and participation from the county. So appreciative of everyone's support of what we've been trying to accomplish here of converting or creating 294 committed affordable units from what is currently a naturally occurring affordable property, but with no long-term rent protections and no viable path towards an extensive renovation that would also preserve affordability. Given that I believe there are some new members of the commission, I'm gonna, if okay with you, run through just a handful of slides, many of which will touch on similar themes as Melissa just talked about, but also sharing a bit about standard and what it is we do and our plans for the property. And then I'll open it up for questions, as I'm sure there will be many. Just share my screen here. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. So as I mentioned, we've been involved for a bit over 5 years, starting in, I guess it was late 2016, early 2017, when the property came to market. It was a brokered process, and standard, we are focused almost exclusively on the creation and preservation of affordable and workforce housing. So we looked at this a little differently than most folks who saw this, tremendous 16-acre parcel in a transit-oriented location in Arlington, and said, wouldn't it be great if we could convert that to affordable housing, as opposed to saying, how can we, renovate it and raise rents? So we approached the county thinking that they would be like-minded, and found them very receptive. And we were able to work out a deal with the county where they provided some subordinate financing to help us kind of play at the level where the more traditional value add players were, and were able to acquire the property. At that time, we agreed to put income and rent restrictions in place for all incoming residents, and work towards a long-term committed affordable deal, which is what we've been doing through various different iterations. Looked at increasing density without giving up the affordability, looked at some new development at the property, again, without displacing folks permanently, and always keeping at least 294 affordable units there. Some challenges in the zoning code and other procedural issues precluded that, and we ultimately kind of went back to the drawing board and settled on a renovation of the existing property, as well as a long-term commitment to affordable housing. So 30 years through the Virginia Housing Regulatory Agreement, 75 years as a condition of the county's loan. So positioning this property not just for the next handful of years, but the next many generations, to provide high quality and committed affordable housing in a really high opportunity location, which is something very difficult to come by. And we are very excited to finally be able to be on the doorstep of delivering. I won't go too much into it here. I think Melissa showed many of these are similar pictures before. You know where the property is. It's kind of what it looks like on the inside. It's been maintained, but not truly renovated in more than 20 years. Someone called it classic condition. I think that's probably a bit generous. The property needs rehab. We know it. We're excited to deliver it. The residents know it. We hear it from them often. So we're excited to get in there. On that rehab, when I say comprehensive, it is not hyperbole. It's really difficult to think of an area of the property or an area of a unit that is not going to be materially improved by what is planned. Unit interiors, all the things you typically think of and are most requested by residents, but also the stuff that makes those unit interiors habitable. A nice kitchen and new floors isn't great if your air conditioning doesn't work, or if you've got cold coming through the windows. So HVAC and windows and roofs and facade and plumbing and electrical system upgrades, all in scope, trying to make the property feel a bit more welcoming by modernizing the laundry rooms and rehabbing the pool and the pool areas, the stairs, the landscaping, really every element of the community space. In addition to building a community building just north of 31st Street. Nothing massive. It'll be about 2,000 square foot building, kind of with two distinct uses. One is to house the leasing office and compliance area, because we do have a lot of paperwork that needs to be done, and resident engagement is part of the affordability programs that the property will be entering, but also to provide a true community building for residents. So we'll be able to have those two called wings of the building operate in parallel, and then when the office closes for the day, the amenity spaces will still have access as is appropriate. It's not going to be 24 hours, but it'll be a true community amenity, because the property now is under amenitized. It's got the pool and a bunch of open space, but that's really about it. So putting in a fitness center, computer, business center, a multi-purpose room that can be used for resident events, as well as having a dedicated property management presence in a true office space, as opposed to where it currently is, which is a converted 2-bedroom apartment.
will be, I think, great benefit to the property, as well as allowing that 294th unit, currently the leasing office, to be returned to a 2-bedroom unit. So we've been working with the digital equity team, and part of the AF allocation that has been granted is going towards funding free and internet access for all low-income households at the property for the duration of the Virginia Housing tax credit initial compliance period, so for the next 15 years. What else haven't I mentioned? Oh, no displacement. That's a big one. Melissa mentioned the relocation plan, and that was approved previously. We're working with Housing to Home, which I don't think we were formally engaged with them last time I presented to you. So we're excited about that partnership. We know they've done work in Arlington previously and are very familiar, not just with the Arlington relocation requirements, but also with HUD and Virginia Housing, who are also overseeing the deal, and we have to be compliant with all of that. So having dedicated professionals and a perpetual on-site presence throughout this to ensure that everything is handled appropriately and all resident concerns are addressed and handled as sensitively as they need to be, given how disruptive moving can be, even with the best intentions, is important to us. So we are excited to be partnering with them and effectuating this transformation of the property without displacing any qualified residents. This is kind of the two-winged community building that I had mentioned. So leasing offices on that side, and then into the fitness center and the community room, business center up here. And all of this opens up to the green space at the kind of center of the parcel that's north of 31st Street. So trying to create kind of an indoor-outdoor space there. So we are quite excited to deliver that. I think Melissa ran through the capital stack and how this deal has kind of come together, and it's faced many headwinds, not just in the last 5 years, but specifically in the last year or so since I was here. Interest rates have not been kind. Construction costs similarly not kind, and the inflationary impact on operating expenses similarly cut into our ability to raise debt proceeds. So there's a lot of creative thinking and good partnership that was done amongst all financial stakeholders in the deal, as well as the professionals that are managing and completing the construction, and tried to figure a way to still get the deal to pencil. We made up a ton of the gap that was created by these headwinds, and then being able to come back and work hand in hand with the county to figure out how to solve the rest of it, which is what brings us here tonight. We're incredibly thankful for the opportunity to keep this alive. So that's kind of what I had prepared. Unless Melissa's going to tell me I forget anything, because I often do. Please, come at us with questions. Happy to answer anything you've got.
Thank you, Stephen and Melissa. I want to propose something a little unorthodox, just because I know that Karen has to leave. That unless there's an objection, I'd like to entertain a motion to recommend approval to the county board that reflects any discussion that we have after we take that vote, so that Karen can leave after the vote, but we can still ask questions and have discussion, and then just make sure that the letter incorporates any of that feedback from commissioners. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you. So let's do a roll call vote on that. I vote yes. Commissioner Montgomery? Yes. Commissioner Norris?
Yes.
Commissioner Surface?
Yes.
Commissioner Blake? Commissioner McGilvray?
Yes.
Commissioner Heminger?
Yes.
Commissioner Edwards?
Yes.
Commissioner Ubelkava?
Yes.
And I think we still don't have Paul, right? Yep, okay. Thank you. That passes unanimously, and now we can have discussion.
And then I'll watch the rest of it.
Thank you, Karen.
The one question I had was, for staff, how does this additional request of AHIF impact any of the funds that we've been discussing previously? Or is this increasing our commitment and our budgetary constraints?
Alyssa, can you speak to that?
Yes, there is enough in unallocated affordable housing investment funds to proceed with the up to 3 million AHIF allocation. And I do want to note that that's the max. If there are improvements in the equity available to the project or other cost savings, the amount that's actually dispersed could be less than that.
I had a question for Stephen, and I think I may have asked this before when you previously come before the Housing Commission, but one of the things that our nonprofit affordable housing providers often offer for their properties are kind of wraparound services. So they typically have like a resident services in place, and that can offer everything ranging from like tutoring to the students that live there to efforts like coaching and training around managing a budget and things to help the low-income residents just have a better quality of life and standard of living at the property. Is that something that Standard is looking at doing, either offering that through your property management firm or contracting out to a separate firm to provide some of those wraparound services that we would typically get if it was a nonprofit affordable housing provider?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. It's not something that is currently contemplated as a like a staffed position at the property, and recognize that there are others who do that in different deal structures, but this one doesn't necessarily lend itself well to that. That said, it's a great location. Building this community building with the multi-purpose room, it's not something that we intend to let sit vacant. So we are supportive of residents and ensuring that, as I believe you said, that they are fulfilling the potential and getting more higher quality of life out of being at the property. And our property management firm, Franklin Johnson Group, is very familiar with the area and will be, along with corporate support from us, seeking to engage with many of the nonprofits or other community groups that work in the area, making that community building space available to them to have programming, and to the extent that we can sponsor and support that, absolutely doing so. But unfortunately, a deal that doesn't lend itself well to having a full-time coordinator or someone on staff for it. So we don't think that the residents will be entirely on their own, and we'll look to further that as best we can. In addition to working closely with the county, there'll be permanent supportive housing units at the property and all of the programming and support that comes specific to those residents. So things that we have thought through and trying to find the best path forward there with the resources that are available.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I definitely would encourage Standard to take a look and see what partnerships and things could be available to help provide some of those services for the residents, understanding that the deal is not currently structured to have a full-time position, but if that's something that one of the existing staff of the property management firm could take on as an added responsibility, or just if there's, I'm sure a lot of our local nonprofits that provide, whether it's like employment support or AFAC for food or other things, would be more than happy to work, at least have discussions to figure out what could be possible. But I just recommend, at least looking into that to see what's possible, even if it's not part of the planned structure at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate your encouraging us. We are very anxious to go down that road, so you'll not be disappointed.
Other questions? Oh, Haley.
Hey, thanks. I was just wondering, do you all have your bond allocation and your HUD commitment? I guess I'm hoping for your sake that the closing date that you're working toward is pretty firm, because I know it's been a journey for you guys. So I was just curious how certain that was.
It is certain. We have both bond allocation, firm commitment, and are waiting on HUD to confirm the closing date, which we've requested the 28th of April.
Congrats.
Thank you. Hard fought.
Actually, did you want to ask that question? Let's ask the question.
So just my question with the renovations and stuff, was there ever a point with Park Shirlington have having the same issues as a Serrano, in the sense of the maintenance of the property. I mean, I understand, Stephen, you said that oh God, you used the term. I'm blanking out, but yeah, it's old. I mean, yeah, you said it's 1950, it's old, but were there any issues, that has happened, like the Serrano has happened with the security, because the Serrano building's old as well. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not intimately familiar with the Serrano specifics, so I can't, compare the two. I can say that we do not generally have security issues, certainly nothing beyond the norm of a large, multifamily property. No security issues, no significant deferred maintenance issues. There's nothing, hidden and lingering that's, the big boogeyman of the property. We've been involved with it for 5 years. We probably have found it by now. As part of our existing county involvement as on the lender, they're in there inspecting as well to make sure that we're being honest and keeping the property where it needs to be. So it's always room for improvement. We're excited to improve it because it's it feels like a 1950s property that's been maintained but not deeply invested in. So we're very excited to get what it deserves.
Thank you.
I have 3 questions. I heard you talk about adding carpet, and it might just be my personal opinion, but I was just wondering why we decided to go with carpet over, I guess I heard like vinyl as well. That seems to be like the industry standard.
There's currently carpet throughout. So we had been hopeful of doing vinyl, luxury vinyl throughout. It's based on a combination of factors, one being cost and the other actually being a good bit of resident feedback. Carpet in the bedrooms is not terrible. And it is a cost saver, so we're still planning on the hard surface luxury vinyl tile, the wood looking plank throughout the common areas. But in the bedrooms, apologies, definitely no carpet in the bathrooms. In the bedrooms, carpeting. So that's part of the trying to get the cost back in line, as we were facing tremendous number of headwinds, and it was not as opposed by residents as we had thought.
No.
And then I was wondering, when they did the 95 like HOV lanes, they added the sound barrier all the way up and down on both sides. But then for some reason, like this low income property didn't get the sound barrier. So I just wonder, will like the renovations include that, or do you have any information on why that wasn't put there when they did that? Or
I wish I had a great answer. I was surprised and disappointed when they stopped right along 395 just for the property, and we reached out to the state to try to get an answer and see if a decision could be reversed. But the ship had sailed. We had not been involved early enough in it. So an unfortunate situation there. But as part of your, as I mentioned, there are a lot of eyes on this renovation project. Virginia Housing, HUD, and the county all have their standards. I know that specific to the HUD approvals, there is an interior sound measure test, and they look very closely at the specs that are being used to renovate the buildings, window types, insulation, sidings, et cetera. So extensive sound study has been done. It's been designed to try to attenuate some of that highway noise, even without the sound barrier along 395.
I appreciate this. Definitely appreciate that insight. When I think about the sound barriers that are there now and where the hole is, it seems like there would be amplified noise, coming from where there is no current barrier. And I'm glad that quality of life kind of came up. I just, that's what's top of mind for me. My last question is like a 2-part question. In your slideshow, you had language that said something to the effect of in-unit internet access for qualified residents. I was wondering if you could tell me, one, what that means, and then I have a second part to this question.
Sure. In-unit, meaning they will have access in their unit to internet at no cost. If I say something that sounds silly, it's because I'm not especially technically inclined, so forgive me. But symmetric 30 megabyte per second upload and download speed is what your digital equity team has educated me on as being kind of the bare standard that they're looking to have in the unit. So we will provide that to all qualified residents. I imagine you're wondering what qualified means. Income qualified. So the county is providing funds to allow this to be put in place at no cost to residents and income qualified. So low income households that are qualified under the LIHTC program will be eligible to receive the free internet.
That's at least 294 residents, if I understand that correctly, right?
Yeah, it's property's 294 units. The vast majority, 78, I want to say %, are 2 or 3 bedroom units. So it serves a tremendous number of families. So I don't have an exact resident count for you, but it's a multiple of 294.
I appreciate that. When I think about the cost to do, internet, which I think is great, it's part of our digital equity goals, to do it for like 80% of the property, but not for the 20. It doesn't seem like there would be very much more cost to just do the entire property if it's just 20% more. So have you quantified how much that would be for that additional 20%?
The entire property will be served. The infrastructure will be there. I think the reserve set aside with the county funds is just to provide that at no cost for low-income households. So we will use the benefit of the scale of the property to try to negotiate a bulk contract so that a provider can come in and say, we put the infrastructure in place. I believe it's currently Comcast that has the infrastructure there. They will be able to serve all 294 units, those who choose to sign up. Low-income households will be eligible to if they want internet in their units, to have that cost covered through these funds set aside by the county. If a household is not low income qualified, and it is our intention that all households of the property will be, then they would pay on their own, yet still receive the benefit of the scale kind of discount of the bulk pricing that has been negotiated on behalf of the entire property.
Thank you. My last question is, right next to this property, there's 2 apartment buildings. I just wonder, I know like at this point, we're not going back to the drawing board, but when I think about Barcroft, and I don't know if you're familiar with that property, they're overhauling it, but they're adding a ton of density. They're going up. We already have the zoning laws in this RA zone. So I just wonder why didn't we go more dense on this property?
A great question. It was explored, it was advanced to the point of a 4.1 submission. Without going too deep into it, and it's been a few years since I've really been in the weeds on this, the layout of this site with the borders being significantly below kind of where you think of the apartments existing didn't allow for that much more height, because elevation is, or the max height allowance, I forget if it was at the time or currently, is measured based on the average above the perimeter elevation. So if you measure around the perimeter of the site, you're at times 20 or 30 feet below where you'd start building. So you couldn't do but so much more. And we were going down that path right around the time that the zoning changes were proposed and subsequently enacted. And I believe there was, after that, a modification to them, but in that window between when they were passed and when they were modified, we just unfortunately ran out of time and ability to continue hanging on without a clear direction forward. So I had to pivot to the renovation.
Gotcha. I mean, it just seems like in a landstrap county like Arlington, I know, again, we can't go back. It's just, in my opinion, such a missed opportunity. We've already voted yes, but, we need housing. I think it's a crisis, and yeah, I definitely think there's a missed opportunity with the land use there. But thank you for your questions, or answering my questions, I should say.
Thank you for the thoughtful questions.
I want to piggyback off of what Michael said as far as like the housing. Do you trying to get my words together? Do you partner up with the local? I know it used to be called I think it's called Pathway Forward or Path Forward. What percentage of the apartments on this particular property could be or would be assigned to individuals who just transitioning from homelessness and is searching for permanent housing? Have the county partnered up with? Is it called
Pathways?
Pathways.
Or Path Forward, maybe.
Pathways, because it used to be called something else.
Yeah, it was A-SPAN.
A-SPAN, yeah.
So I think that's rapid rehousing units.
Okay. Do you have rapid rehousing units available? Because the homelessness is starting to pick up, and I don't know if it's coming from, other jurisdictions, but like when I'm driving around, I see more individuals who are homeless under the underpath. And even walking around with like their shopping carts, and I didn't notice that before. I've only lived in Arlington about going on 6 years now. And I know I had volunteered when it was under A-SPAN, and they said that they would go drive around and try to locate actual homeless individuals. But ever since then, this was like pre-pandemic, ever since then, I'm noticing it's more individuals. So is the county allocating more rapid rehousing for homeless individuals? And is this one of the properties that y'all can consider?
Melissa, would that be part of permanent supportive housing, or is that's separate from that?
Yeah, I was just about to say that this property will include 15 permanent supportive housing units, and permanent supportive housing provides affordable housing and those supportive services for people at risk of homelessness, people with disabilities, to obtain and maintain their housing.
Okay, I get it to support those, but individuals who are homeless, 9 out of 10, they're lacking the income. So would they have to go through the whole traditional path of like going to get Section 8 housing, different things like that? Because if you're already homeless, getting affordable housing, when that's considered like, I don't know, rent is like $1,300. Like if they could, they would have. So like, how do y'all bridge that gap for people who don't have jobs and are living on the street?
I think that's more a DHS question. Yeah, then it is CPHD, unless you guys know the answer to that. But I know DHS, I think, contracts with affordable housing providers to offer units for formerly homeless individuals. But I don't think that's typically baked in at the deal stage. But honestly, I don't know enough about how they get those units.
Yeah, DHS works with a variety of partners and has referrals. So there'll be 15 permanent supportive units at the property, and so DHS will help to get those filled. And there is a rent subsidy associated with that. So if the units are up to 60% AMI, and the person who's being referred, doesn't make that, there'll be a rent subsidy provided by their DHS program to help fill that gap.
Is that a question we could get a specific answer from DHS on the units where we do rapid rehousing for unhoused individuals? Like, how do they get those units to do that? Like, what is that process?
It is through, so CITSAC, which I sit on, has role with that. And it's a referral basis from a variety of different entities, Path Forward being one of them. But yes, so the county designates where those particular slots are, and then they fill them as they become available through referrals.
As they come available, so there's no availability, then people are just still left out.
Correct, yes.
Well, or in a
That's the
shelter.
problem.
Yes.
Well, the shelter here, they don't have that much space. Yeah, I volunteer there, they don't have that much space. So I'm just like, this is the housing commission. And me personally, I just think that it's important that we always talk about affordable housing. And when we look at that's why I asked about how much is these new apartments are gonna be, and what do you consider affordable? Like, what is affordable to you? Because you make $100,000 is not affordable to a person who's homeless and lives on the street and don't have any income.
It's set at for affordability.
That's not realistic.
Correct, no, but I'm saying
And that's a bigger issue
that's
that
the
Arlington has,
definition
that
of
we don't-
affordability.
We don't build a lot of deeply subsidized units because they're very expensive. There's efforts to get, like at Barcroft, I think we were briefed on that, but they're trying to set aside a certain portion of the Barcroft units for 30% of AMI, so the very low, or is that extremely low?
That's very low.
Yeah. And so
Extremely low is below 30.
Arlington has a huge shortage of 30% AMI and below, which is typically where if we had public housing, that would serve that population. Our housing grants and housing choice vouchers also go to generally that population, but our housing grants and housing choice vouchers, I think, are about a little over 3,000 total, and we have about 10,000 households that are at 30% of the AMI are below. So there's a lot of people who aren't served by existing programs that are Arlington has. But
So how do we bridge that gap? What is the county doing to bridge that gap?
That is a bigger discussion that I think Park Arlington property can answer.
Right, no,
I just have one question. Sorry, Stephen, you said that the renovations are, well, it says it'll start this summer, right? Right?
Yeah.
So, is there like a plan to kind of do, a show and tell of the renovated units, the end of this year or next year for the Housing Commission? Because I think this is it's a great plan. It's very ambitious and it's exciting for that area, with the solar panels and everything like that. I just think that's kind of cool to see. Yes, pictures are fine, but kind of get a in-house. Yes.
Nothing planned, but it can be arranged. If that's of interest, you guys let me know. We're planning to start renovations called, August. That's probably a fair date. Clubhouse being built, same as we start the first handful of units at the property. So we should have some finished units, which will obviously all be occupied. So we'd have to find some time to get folks in there that works for residents. But yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, happy to work with staff and standard, try to organize the site.
Thanks. Yeah, that was something I was about to say, that the appropriate time can certainly help facilitate that.
Be awesome. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Back?
Could Doris ask?
Yep, go ahead, Doris.
I was just wondering whether any of the renovations are going to result in accessible units, and I'm making an assumption that the newly built building is going to have it's going to have the rental office, right? And it's going to be a community center kind of thing. So I assume it will be compliant with ADA, not just fair housing, but ADA.
That's correct, fully compliant.
Yeah. So will there be any increase in accessible units? Because this is an old building, so.
Yeah, there are certainly some challenges that come with older buildings and creating accessible units, but yes, we've thought fairly creatively and have been able to find not as many as we would like, but yes, to create some truly accessible built units at the property, both interior with the associated horizontal and vertical clearances, as well as accessible path to those units, which, given the topography of the site, was a tremendous challenge.
Because of the siting.
That's right. There's a lot of elevation, a lot of steeper grades, and the buildings themselves. No units sit at grade.
But will there be units that are going to be maneuverable, at least at the level of the Fair Housing Act?
Yes, there will be.
There will be.
It's a HUD deal. So HUD, Virginia Housing, and the county all have appropriate regulations. I think HUD is probably the most stringent on the accessible side, and we are compliant and blessed by HUD with our plans.
But what I was asking is how many might there be, or do you know?
There will be 15 units with accessible interiors, and of those 15, 8 will have accessible route.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Oh, there are elevators in there too, right?
There are no elevators to the property.
No, it's all garden.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
Just trying to clarify what I remember. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, one last question. With the amenities, all those will also be compliant as well for people with disabilities?
Yeah, it's a big part of the reason we chose the location that we did for that building it's accessible.
The building as well as the swimming pool and stuff?
The swimming pool, yes, it will be accessible. There's parking space, or a couple parking spaces right in front of it, but it does sit kind of the northwest corner of the property down a hill. So folks, you can't, you need to have transportation to get there in an accessible manner. But yes, once you are near the pool, it's accessible.
But will the pool also have the required either ramp or lift?
Yep, it's an at-grade pool. You can get into it. It is fully accessible.
Are you using ramps? Is that what you're using?
I'm sorry?
Ramp to the water?
I do not know those specifics. I apologize. I can get back to you, but it is fully compliant with all appropriate regulations under HUD and Virginia guidelines.
Okay.
Yeah, but the ADA rule is what you follow for swimming pools. So.
I'm gonna cut off discussion on this item there. And I really appreciate Stephen and Melissa, your presentations on this. And we will submit our letter to the board expressing our support, but also providing synopsis of the discussion that we had as well.
Great. Thank you all so much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
The next item that we have, I think is probably Melissa, and that's Barcroft process update.
Yes, that's me. Thanks again for bearing with me for a moment as I try and start. Hopefully, can everyone see the slideshow?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So thank you again for having me here today. And I'm the General County Project Coordinator for Barcroft. Even though I'm the overall coordinator, there are different staff leading different aspects of the project. And I do have with me Mark McCulley with Arlington Economic Development, who's leading and coordinating we're calling the Master Financing and Development Plan aspect of this project, or the long-term planning for the overall site, in case there are questions about that. And David Hilday from the Jared Lynch team is also here to help answer any questions. And did you see the slide change?
Yes.
Okay. So I did want to come here tonight to let you know of a process update for Barcroft. But first, I'd like to share some background information as a refresher. Back in December 2021, Jared Lynch purchased Barcroft Apartments with the assistance of a $150 million loan from the county and a $160 million loan from Amazon. And the units are restricted up to 60% AMI for 99 years, which is the longest affordability term in the county's portfolio. And since the time of acquisition, Jared Lynch had worked on their Master Financing and Development Plan, which was submitted to the county on October 29th, 2022. And the Master Financing and Development Plan, or call it MFDP for short, is a high-level overview of some of the planning, land use, and affordability concepts. So county staff is now in the process of reviewing the MFDP and long-term planning concepts that would go through a public engagement process and ultimately county board consideration. And as county staff and Jared Lynch continue to work on long-term planning for the site, Jared Lynch has agreed to move forward with advancing an initial renovation project of approximately 100 homes at Barcroft Apartments. And this will allow Jared Lynch to begin to deliver renovated, upgraded homes for existing Barcroft residents. And the renovations would include items such as updated bathrooms and kitchens, new and unit laundry, as well as upgrading HVAC and other systems. And for the initial renovation project, Jared Lynch is considering buildings that are part of the existing Neighborhoods Form-Based Code conservation area and are not envisioned by either the county or Jared Lynch for redevelopment, regardless of the ultimate plans for the overall property. And there will be a community engagement process associated with the initial renovation project. Jared Lynch will host resident meetings to ensure that the residents are informed of renovation plans and can provide feedback and ask questions. Jared Lynch will also meet with community stakeholders and commissions consistent with the county's use permit and affordable housing development processes. And public engagement for county board consideration of the long-term plan is anticipated for later this calendar year. And county staff and Jai Lynch will be exploring ways to provide deeper affordability at Barcroft, which could include units restricted at various income levels below 60% AMI, continuing to encourage housing grant and housing choice voucher referrals for eligible residents and other subsidy options. So options and recommendations for deepening affordability in the initial renovation project will be discussed